Hogwarts. What bad intentions could a little badger have? Chapter 61. Oh. Where did you get this eight-eyed giant spider? Quote. For you, this is a dangerous creature. Hagrid finally said something that was normal for others. Of course. In his eyes, this furry creature could only grow into a huge monster. It was still a cute little thing. Well, on the train yesterday. Blake told him about the eight-eyed spider's explosion on the Hogwarts Express train yesterday. Then, he told Hagrid about how he was knocked out by a stick. Many people saw it at the time. So Harry and Ronald also knew about it. Hagrid asked in surprise, casting a swelling spell on a baby eight-eyed spider. Oh, isn't that the same as amplifying the destructive power of a naughty brat more than 10 times? No wonder he was so hungry on the train. To be honest, the long time made it expand. But it still consumes its own physical strength. So it gets hungry very quickly. If it wasn't so hungry at the time, it wanted to find something suitable quickly and eat it right away. Then it should attack someone. Blake thought for a moment. He understood immediately. At that time, only Toad Raffles was the right size. It was just enough for the eight-eyed spider to swallow. If the eight-eyed spider was bigger at that time, or it would choose the little wizard on the train as its primary target. Then, the student named Lee Jordan. Where did you get this eight-eyed spider? This kind of creature is rare. Hagrid put the iron cage aside. She asked casually. Well, he said he caught it on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Before the summer vacation this year. The spider was still very small at that time. He just wanted to catch one to scare people. Blake replied. Well, Hagrid pondered for a long time. Then she muttered something vaguely from her mouth. But Blake heard the words in his muffled sentences. Words like, Aragog, appeared. She must have recognized it. This was the descendant of Aragog. Hey, you don't know. I spent a lot of effort last semester. That's why the Weasley twins. Their friends were also chased out of the Forbidden Forest. But it's okay, Blake. Leave this little guy to me. Hagrid didn't take it to heart. Since he was a descendant of Aragog, all he had to do was to release it back into the Forbidden Forest. Then, it would naturally return to its family. Blake didn't have any objections to this. In fact, he could totally raise this little fellow in the House of Whims. But Cassandra was afraid of spiders. Feed her to the eight-eyed spider. That was a bit too much. Might as well hand it over to Hagrid. Let it return to the Forbidden Forest. As long as it returned to the Forbidden Forest. Then, he wouldn't have to feed it all day. It hunts by itself. They would rejoin the group of giant eight-eyed spiders. This eight-eyed giant spider was completely tamed by Blake's druid skill. Even if it lived in the Forbidden Forest. However, as long as Blake called for it, it would still run to Blake immediately. In that case, wait until it's bigger. Blake could still slowly collect its venom. Of course, Blake had another idea. That was to use his druid ability. Strengthen this eight-eyed giant spider. If it could become more powerful, it could conquer more giant eight-eyed spiders. Wait until it had accumulated enough strength. It was possible to lead the tribe. Attack into the depths of the Forbidden Forest. Take Aragosi's position. Become the new king of the giant eight-eyed spider tribe. Ha ha ha. Quote. Hey, Blake, why are you laughing so badly? Quote. Hermione hit him on the arm. Oh, I'm sorry. I just remembered something happy. Hermione breathed a sigh of relief at this time. She was worried that Blake wouldn't hand over the giant eight-eyed spider. If he kept spiders in the House of Whims, then she would be on tenterhooks every time she entered the House of Whims. Although she wasn't as afraid of spiders as Cassandra. But this kind of thing was still too ferocious. No girl would like this kind of thing. Then, Blake began to help Hagrid with her work. Barbecue or something. He hadn't eaten enough just now. As Blake put the barbecue on the grill, he sprinkled the seasoning he had just made. Slash. An exaggerated aroma spread out directly. Cassandra and Hermione didn't have much appetite. After all, they had eaten dinner. They just wanted to stroll around here. But now, maybe it was like, they could still eat a little. They smelled the aroma. Even Ronald was still afraid of the iron cage over there. But now he put his mind on the grill for the time being. After a long while. Come, try my cooking. Blake said. He put the barbecue on a plate. Then he put the plate on the table that Hagrid had specially placed outside the house. Everyone gathered around. Even Cassandra, who had a reserved personality. After smelling the aroma, they couldn't restrain their little hands. They picked up a set of cutlery. It's so delicious. Harry's eyes were wet. What if we can't eat such delicious barbecue in the future? Of course, basically no one had time to talk. It was really because the barbecue Blake made was too fragrant. Hermione and Cassandra were girls. They didn't have a big appetite. And they had already eaten dinner before they came. Therefore, he stopped after eating a little. Harry didn't eat much either. This guy's eating speed was not any slower than Hagrid's. Blake silently accepted the few silver treasure chests that everyone dropped because it was too delicious. Then he put his hands behind his back. His fingers twitched. Crack. There was a slight metallic sound. No one cared. Bang. Then, a big hole suddenly appeared in the iron cage. The giant eight-eyed spider larva rushed out with a whoosh. Wow. No one panicked as much as Ronald. Because that's where the spider was heading. Ronald rolled his eyes. He lay on the ground. Of course, the eight-eyed giant spider didn't do anything to him. It just jumped up. Then it flashed across his face. It ran in the direction of the Forbidden Forest. Extreme fear has been detected. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a silver treasure chest. Quote. Blake looked at Ronald on the ground in disappointment. When he first saw the eight-eyed giant spider just now, there was a gold treasure chest. Why was he so scared now? It was only a silver treasure. And he fainted when he saw something scary. It was simply too bad. Blake sometimes felt that his luck was too bad. Just like when he was playing a card game. He was supposed to get something. But he always had to get a super big guarantee. Oh. It seems that your transformation time is up. Quote. Hagrid observed the iron cage that had turned back into a cake box. But don't worry about it. It has returned to the Forbidden Forest. Blake came in front of Ronald. Let me have a look. Blake squatted down. He put his hand on Ronald's forehead. Traces of green druid power seeped into Ronald's forehead. The next second, Ronald jumped up with a swoosh. He screamed, "Spider!" Then, he jumped into Harry's arms. Harry tried hard to push Ronald away from his neck. But this guy was too strong. Like an octopus, it wrapped itself around his body. Harry suspected that this guy was a cunning zero. He was here to take advantage of Harry. Hermione curled his lips. This guy was really timid. Cassandra was also afraid of spiders. But she wouldn't lose her composure to this extent. It's okay. The spider has left, Blake said. The druid's special magic had a strong healing effect. Not only could it heal physical injuries, it could also heal mental injuries. How did Blake know about it? He just tested it on Ronald. After a long time, Ronald finally recovered from the panic. I'm sorry, Harry, that spider was really big. Well, I know, Harry said. He couldn't help but take a step back. He was afraid of being hugged by this guy again. Ronald stared at Harry with wide eyes. Are you serious when you take half a step back? Are we still good buddies? Are we still good buddies? When he left Hagrid's place, it was already 8:30 in the evening. There were only 30 minutes left before the curfew. After he said goodbye to the others, he started to walk to the common room in Hufflepuff. He suddenly stopped in his tracks. Not because he was lost, but because it was a good time to go on a night trip. Go back to the dormitory to sleep. No way. As for the reason for going on a night trip, did he need a reason for going on a night trip? Blake was busy running around today. A lot of things happened. He didn't stop. He carefully toured the castle that he had always wanted to see in his last life. Now, he was in the mood. Naturally, he would go on a night trip. Tisk, tisk. If only I could turn invisible. Blake muttered to himself. He forgot to practice the illusion spell before. If he had a powerful illusion spell like Dumbledore, then he could do whatever he wanted at Hogwarts. Just as Blake felt a little regretful, he was ready to go back and practice the illusion spell. Suddenly, the cloak, who had transformed into a school uniform, reached out a small blue hand and patted his shoulder. What's the matter? Whoosh. The blue cloak suddenly returned to its original form. And then wrapped it around Blake. Whoosh. Blake found that he was invisible. You even have the ability to turn invisible. And this degree of invisibility. An ordinary illusory body curse. If he moved. And there would still be some blurry shadows. But now. The cloak's invisibility function was similar to Harry's invisibility cloak. And it was much more convenient than Harry's invisibility cloak. Harry's invisibility cloak. He needed to completely cover his body. Only then could he not reveal any flaws. But Blake's cloak. He just needed to wear it. He could be completely invisible. He didn't need to worry about accidentally revealing his arm. Revealing his calf or something. Blake was overjoyed. With such a good general. Where else couldn't he go? Then, where should I go? Blake pondered for a moment. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He already had a goal in his heart. That was Filch's office. Don't underestimate Filch's office. There were a lot of good things there. He didn't know how many little wizard's treasures were stored there. Fred and George when they were in their first year. No, from Filch's office. Did he take away a map of the resurrection point? That was Harry's father's treasure from more than 10 years ago. The things from more than 10 years ago were all there. What about even longer ago? Tisk tisk. The more he thought about it, the more he looked forward to it. Blake did not stop for a moment. He headed straight for Filch's office. Filch's office wasn't hard to find. Soon, he appeared in Blake's line of sight. There was still light inside the window. Blake lightened his footsteps. He slowly walked over. There was no one in the office. Filch was not there. However, the bony Madame Loris was squatting on the desk. He looked suspiciously in Blake's direction. Over there. There seemed to be an unfamiliar smell. But there was no one in sight. Madame Loris slowly jumped off the desk. He walked towards the place where the strange aura came from. Suddenly, Madame Loris suddenly felt her body being lifted up by someone. The shocked Madame Loris opened her mouth wide. He was about to call Filch over. Blake was an archdruid. How could he give it this chance? He picked up the old cat. Then, it was a familiar combo. Catmint plus max level cat petting technique plus druid magic. Before Madame Loris could say anything, she almost fainted in Blake's hands. Jujuju-en. Blake let out a treacherous laugh. After a while, Madame Loris was as docile as a kitten. Oh, it was originally a kitten. Then it was okay. Blake said in a low voice, go and let Mr. Filch away. Don't come back in an hour. Kitten, you must do as I say. After all, you don't want to lose the feeling just now, do you? Meow. After a while, Blake heard Mr. Filch's surprised voice. You found a student on a night trip. On the 8th floor. Great. Take me there. Filch hurried back to his office. He took out a lantern. After locking the door. Then, she ran up the stairs, panting heavily. When Filch's voice gradually disappeared. Filch's locked office door. It opened with a creak. The lock had already slipped to the other side. Just in case. Blake did not cancel his invisibility. He went straight into Filch's office. Then he saw the box at a glance. There was a sentence written on the box. Confiscated items, high danger. Blake turned around and closed the door first. He pretended that Filch had left the locked door temporarily. After making sure that no one would disturb him, Blake came to the eye-catching box. He scratched his head. He didn't open the box immediately. Because he felt that, after Filch experienced a painful experience of having his home stolen, he would definitely set up some protective measures in this box. After all, Filch was a dud. But he wasn't a fool. Blake took out his custom wand that had been decorated in the shape of a mithril wand. Then he knocked on the box. Then he used some small magic spells that he had learned from Grindelwald. After detecting the mechanism inside, Li Tianlin's eyes lit up. Blake softly chanted an incantation. Relax when you've exhausted your strength. Click. Blake suddenly felt a little movement in the box. Then, he smiled. This meant that the mechanism inside had been removed by him. For Grindelwald. These sneaky people. But it was an extremely useful detection magic spell. He just learned it when he was a child for fun. However, now it was just the right time to deal with Filch's little trick. Blake waved his wand again. Then the lid of the box opened automatically. Blake immediately found a small round mirror on the lid of the box. This was a spyglass that could be bought everywhere in Diagon Alley. As long as someone opened this box, the spyglass would frantically call the police. But now, the spyglass seemed to have lost all its magic. There was no reaction. Blake looked at the box. It was an ordinary-looking box. It actually cast the traceless stretch spell. The space inside was much larger than it looked from the outside. 7:30. The things in the box were also miscellaneous. There was a large pile of paper in the middle. Something like a document. They occupied the middle of the box. Blake guessed that Fred and George. It was at the top of this box. They took the map of the resurrection point. As for the gaps around the stack of paper items in the middle, there were a lot of strange things. There was a wand that emitted an ominous aura. There was an antique teapot that looked terrible. A big machete. 5 or 6 strange spinning tops. 7 or 8 jars with strange liquids. There were also a lot of things that looked like bombs. There were also a lot of items buried under these things. He couldn't see clearly. He had to flip it. Only then could he see clearly. But Blake wasn't that stupid. How could he touch these things directly with his hands? At least half of the sentence on the outside of the box made sense. That was highly dangerous. These were confiscated items from the previous Hogwarts wizards. If it was only a prank attribute, it would be fine. If there were any strange curses, he would not be able to escape. Then it would be bad. Blake waved his wand. The stack of paper items in the middle slowly. On how to eliminate the reproductive isolation between humans and centaurs, that's weird. And an unknown potion formula. Quote. A strange spell book. Oh, I can't open it. If I open it, I'll be cursed. You're really something. Blake slowly began to flip through it. In fact, he didn't have high expectations for tonight. After all, there was a reward like the map of the resurrection point. That was something that could only be encountered and not sought. The rest were these. They weren't prank props with curses. They were just strange research papers. Basically, there was no value. Then, Blake began to flip through the surrounding things. However, there were more cursed magic props. He really wanted to be in such a big box. Find something useful. It was basically like looking for a needle in a haystack. Unless he could spend a few days slowly sorting it out. But, Madame Loris could only buy him an hour. He didn't have that much time to waste on this. Blake searched for a long time. He couldn't find anything valuable in it. Suddenly, the floating cloak that turned into an invisibility cloak suddenly patted him again. Then it stretched out a small hand and pointed at the things in the box. What? Quote. You want these things? Blake waved his hand. A wand with an ominous aura flew up. A corner of the floating cloak stretched out from behind Blake. Then, a big mouth suddenly appeared on the corner of the cloak. Then, crack. The wand with a cursed aura was eaten by the floating cloak just like that. Ding. Devoured magical animal materials appropriate amount. Quote. Ding. The floating cloak's level has increased slightly. Quote. Blake's eyes suddenly lit up. That's right. Although these things were all prank items with a cursed aura. Other than harming people, they were useless. But these things were on top. In order to maintain the magic effect. When they were made, they more or less carried materials from some magical animals. These things weren't completely useless. At the very least, Blake's floating cloak could devour these things to level up. What? How can there be useless trash? Quote. There are only misplaced treasures. Blake said with a smile. Then, Blake's search speed became much faster. Everything that was useless. He threw them all into the big mouth that the floating cloak had transformed into. The floating cloak didn't reject anything. Some things that didn't seem to have magical animal materials. It didn't mind either. It just didn't have the information to level up. Soon, Blake found something that should be useful. A time converter that was about to rot. But the outer structure had already rotted. Only the small hourglass in the middle was left. It was completely useless. Blake took out the small hourglass. Then, he threw the things outside into the mouth of the floating cloak. Then, he continued to search. He continued to feed the floating cloak. Listening to the system prompt continuously. Blake was very happy. Although he didn't find anything particularly useful. But these things were used as dog food. But it helped the floating cloak to earn a lot of experience points. He was one step closer to the red godly artifact level floating cloak. And these things were all harmful things. There was no use in staying here. And they had to occupy such a big place. He cleared them away himself. He was doing a good deed. So, these things were all destroyed. Blake didn't feel the slightest bit guilty, as the things in the box were all emptied. Burp. The hovering cloak let out a long burp. Ding. The floating cloak has been upgraded to the primary level. Quote. Ding. The floating cloak's attributes have increased by 20%. Quote. Blake looked at the floating cloak in surprise. Sure enough, he found something different. There was a red edge on the edge of the cloak. And he could feel it very clearly. The current hovering cloak, its attributes had been greatly improved. Because he could clearly feel the significant increase in the magic power in the cloak. Although only a short period of time had passed. But the things in this box were basically fed to the cloak by Blake. Even those paper things were the same. Magic books, miscellaneous papers, and the like. Of course, he only kept one of the pieces of parchment that looked like a map. This was what he found in this large stack of materials. It was the only thing that he found that might be useful. At this time, Filch's breathing could be heard from afar on the stairs. You guys ran fast this time. Quote. Next time, I must catch you troublemakers. Oh, I really miss the past. Quote. I can lock you troublemakers up and hang you on the wall. Blake calmly put the lid back on the empty box. Then he tapped the lid of the box with his wand. He restored the mechanism inside. Then he walked out of Filch's office slowly. He locked the door again. Filch happened to appear at the corner of the stairs. Blake leaned against the wall. He made way for the center of the road. Filch continued to walk back, cursing. He walked past Blake. Although Blake was only half a meter away from him. But he couldn't see Blake, who was completely invisible. Madame Loris shouted in Blake's direction. Then she followed Filch into the office. Filch didn't doubt his cat at all. He just thought that those little ran away too fast. Blake smiled slightly. Then he turned and left. Although there was nothing valuable in this wave. But he could upgrade the cloak. He could save a lot of magical animal materials. It was also a great gain. What's more, the hourglass and the map. It should be valuable. Blake didn't go anywhere else. He went straight to the common room of Hufflepuff. Until he returned to the door of the common room. The cloak on his body came out of the invisible state. And it changed back to the appearance of the school uniform. At this time, it was not very late. It was only about 11:00. But, usually, there wouldn't be anyone in the lounge at this time. But now, there were also many people studying with books in their hands. Blake walked back to his dorm with a guilty conscience. Just at the door, he heard someone shouting in the dormitory. Wait, bring that over. Quote. It might like that. If we give it that, it will definitely let us go. Bang. Oh my. It doesn't like it. Quote. Wow. Let go. Quote. There. Not there. Quote. Blake sighed. He came back late. He wasn't around. Sniff was playing to its natural instincts. When Blake opened the door, just saw Dabao. He grabbed Roger's trousers and pulled. He seemed to be trying to pull off the shiny button on the top. Wayne, on the other hand, was busy putting away all his shiny things. The moment Blake stepped through the door, Lin Sanjo's expression changed. Sniff stopped in her tracks. The two roommates also stopped moving. Then, it was as if a paused video had been replayed. Sniff threw away the button in his hand. He slipped into Blake's arms. The two roommates also rushed over. Brother. Big brother. Sniff isn't human. It's bullying us. It's really bullying us. All my pocket money has been robbed. Mine too. It also wants to take the button on my underwear. Why are there buttons on your underwear? Is this the main point of attention? The two roommates were disheveled as they complained to Blake about Dabao's atrocities. The corners of Blake's mouth rose slightly. Well, this was the destructive power of Sniff. But, these should be used against outsiders. How could it be used against its own people? Blake pulled Dabao out of his arms. Then he put it on the table. Wayne and Roger took 2 steps back as if they had seen a little devil. Is what they said true? Dabao stood up. It squeaked for a while on its hands and feet. Wayne and Roger looked at this little thing in shock. This little devil, was it complaining? Is he complaining? But, it was clearly bullying others. Could it be that it was complaining about the bad guy, Sniff? Blake's expression gradually became serious. Dabao was being stared at closely. Its voice became softer and softer. Finally, it quietly lowered its little head. A pair of small eyes were rolling around. It looked very flustered. Big Brother is very happy that you can help me get the treasure chest. But, you bullied others without Big Brother's permission. Big Brother is not happy. Big Brother can tell you very responsibly. Big Brother is very angry, and the consequences are very serious. Dabao stood up anxiously. Squeak, squeak, squeak. They're slandering me. They're slandering me. Quote. Blake directly grabbed this little thing. Then he turned it upside down. His fingers kept scratching its little belly. The next moment, 0.4. Ding ling dang lang. A lot of shiny things appeared on the table. It should be the things that Dabao snatched from Wayne and Roger just now. After nothing could be poured out of its little pocket. Dabao's little eyes lost their light. Squeak, squeak, squeak. These are all squeak. Quote. Blake put Dabao aside. Then he said apologetically, I'm sorry. Blake pulled out his wand. The buttons that Wayne and Roger had broken off. The broken mirror. Something like that. All of them were repaired. Wayne and Roger looked at the things in their hands that had been repaired as if they were new in shock. You're so powerful. When did you learn this spell? Compared to you, my wand is now a fire stick. Originally, the two of them had some complaints. After all, their unreliable roommate actually raised Sniff. It had tortured them enough tonight. After seeing Blake's methods, they all wanted to learn a thing or two from Blake. Blake was apologizing to her. So he taught them the restoration spell. They would learn this spell sooner or later. So it was okay to teach them in advance. Like Hermione, a student who previewed in advance. When they entered the school, they were already able to use the restoration spell flexibly. While Wayne and Roger were busy practicing the restoration charm, Roland and the others were busy practicing the restoration charm. Blake pulled Dabao aside and scolded him. After the scolding, Blake said fiercely, I'll take you with me from now on. How can you just harm the two people in the dormitory? They're still. Squeak. There was great doubt in Sniff's little eyes. The night was dark. Wayne and Roger seemed to have fallen asleep. Blake began to count today's harvest. He counted. He found exactly 10 gold treasure chests. Then there were 21 silver treasure chests. 75 bronze treasure chests. In one word, a big harvest. The only thing he felt a little regretful was the wave of wealth and danger in the transformation class in the morning. Professor McGonagall didn't give him a diamond treasure chest as he wished. Or else, what he dropped today plus the synthesized ones. He could get 2 diamond treasure chests. However, this was just enough to synthesize a diamond treasure chest. It wasn't a loss. Blake was about to habitually combine treasure chests. Suddenly, he remembered that he didn't seem to have opened bronze treasure chests consecutively. Although the quality of the skills and items dropped from bronze treasure chests wasn't very high. But there were so many bronze treasure chests. 1 or 2 useful things should have dropped. And bronze treasure chests were the least lacking. What's more, Blake was also a little curious now. In addition to money and skill mastery, bronze treasure chests would drop. What other rewards would appear? System, open a bronze treasure chest for me first. Ding. The system is opening a bronze treasure chest. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining intermediate electrical mastery. Quote. What the hell? Electrical mastery. Quote. Blake was stunned. Then he suddenly felt that he could repair circuits. At this time, Blake remembered the first bronze treasure chest he opened before. It was Madame Marian who dropped it. At that time, he opened intermediate cooking mastery. But now it was covered by superb cooking mastery. Then, Blake had another question. Why did the silver treasure chest open beginner skill mastery? But why could the bronze treasure chest open intermediate skill mastery? Wasn't this a bit unreasonable? System, please open another bronze treasure chest. Ding. Opening a bronze treasure chest for the host. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to host 30 for obtaining intermediate piano mastery. Quote. Blake was lying on the bed. He pinched his chin with a serious expression. He suddenly understood. The skills from the bronze treasure chest seemed to be Muggle type. It was a skill that had nothing to do with the magic world. On the other hand, the mastery skill from the silver treasure chest was only at the basic level. However, it was of the magical side. For example, herbology, potioneering, magic wands, and so on. Thinking of this, Blake understood. However, he still wanted to know. Aside from the bronze treasure chest skills, what else could he get? System. Help me open 10 bronze treasure chests consecutively. Quote. Ding. Currently opening 10 bronze treasure chests. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining intermediate guitar mastery. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining intermediate fishing proficiency. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a pair of bear slippers. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a platinum ring. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a bottle of cola. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining Eighth Brother's secret hamburger. Quote. Hiss, what the hell? It was one thing for Shi-Feng to obtain skill mastery. Even though Blake didn't really need it now. But at the very least, it was an intermediate skill. But what the hell was the ring and the slippers? And there was cola, hamburger, and so on. Blake finally understood at this time. In addition to some ordinary intermediate skills from the bronze treasure chest, there would also be all kinds of strange things. Sometimes, it might be a valuable piece of jewelry. But it might also be a piece of trash. The gap was too big. But, it was also good to get a wave of ordinary skills. At that time, he would know something about everything. And then there would be an intermediate mastery level. It was very good. After that, he could use these skills to find a way to get more treasure chests from the tools. Just like the cooking proficiency before. Blake didn't know if this could be considered as increasing income and reducing expenditure. Blake thought of this. Without hesitation, he directly opened all the remaining bronze treasure chests. What made him happy was that the drop rate of skill mastery was quite high. So, after opening more than 70 treasure chests, Blake really became an all-rounder who knew a little about everything. After all, the intermediate mastery level was already better than the expert level. Blake was still unwilling to give up. He took out the platinum ring and looked at it carefully. He still didn't believe it. The treasure chest would give out useless things. After careful observation, he found some clues. He put the ring back into the system warehouse. Then he clicked on the ring. Then, he would find a small line of words. It was a very small description. Low-level agility ring. After equipping, it will increase reaction by 0.1%. Blake's eyes widened. Equipment. This was equipment, right? This system treasure chest could give out equipment. But Blake soon came back to his senses. The blue floating cloak he got. Wasn't it also a piece of equipment? Blake immediately looked at the pair of bear slippers. Low-level speed shoes. After equipping, it will increase movement speed by 0.1%. Quote. Even the food type items that were opened later were different. For example, the bottle of Coke. They all had special effects. The text description was very clear. On the surface, it was a bottle of Coke. But secretly, it was still a bottle of Coke. Ahem. In fact, it was the Coke that could replenish magic power. As for Eighth Brother's secret hamburger, it had the function of quickly replenishing physical strength. After seeing the function of these food rewards, Blake found these food rewards seemed to be more useful than those equipment rewards. After all, the food rewards could restore the status. But the equipment from the bronze treasure chest, the attribute bonus was too low. Then what should I do? It's useless to pile up so much equipment. If I can break it down. Blake paused. He was experienced. He knew deeply. A system without a manual. He had to say the keywords himself. Equipment breakdown. Ding. Opening the equipment breakdown interface. Quote. Blake. After a series of operations, Blake had only left behind a few pieces of equipment. Everything else was broken down. After the decomposition, Blake obtained some metal materials. And most of the magical animal materials. If I don't use these materials to make equipment, then I'll have to use them. Then I'll use it as dog food to upgrade my cloak. Suddenly, Blake paused. I have all the materials. There shouldn't be an equipment manufacturing system, right? Ding. Opening the equipment synthesis system. Quote. Ding. The host does not have the blueprint and cannot create any equipment. Quote. Ding. The host has unlocked the synthesis and decomposition functions of the system. Ding. The system has begun adding materials and normal equipment as rewards. Quote. Blake was speechless as he watched the system activate the upgrade. However, there were also benefits to leveling up. It was a piece of equipment obtained from an advanced treasure chest. The attributes of the equipment obtained from bronze treasure chests were definitely not something that could be obtained from a bronze treasure chest could compare to. Because there was no blueprint. So Bu had no choice but to turn it off. He looked at the silver treasure chest. In view of the outstanding performance of the bronze treasure chest. Now, he also wanted to open these silver treasure chests to take a look. And so, ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining elementary black magic proficiency. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 100 potion concoction experience points. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a strand of unicorn tail hair. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 50 milliliters of giant 8-eyed spider venom. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a pair of crocodile shoes. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a necklace. Quote. After the silver treasure chest was opened, Blake found that the quality of the reward was much better than the bronze one. Apart from those expensive materials, there was nothing else. There were also some equipment. After taking a look at the attributes of these equipment, he immediately opened the bronze treasure chest just now. The remaining few pieces of equipment were thrown in to be broken down. Because of the equipment from the silver treasure chest, its attributes were much better than a bronze one. Take that pair of leather shoes for example. It was just a pair of leather shoes. It increased movement speed by 20%, magic defense by 10%, and weight by 30%. Compared to bronze-ranked equipment, that 0.1% increase in attributes was much stronger than before. Blake happily equipped the few pieces of equipment he had obtained from the silver treasure chest. A watch, a necklace, a ring, a pair of gloves, a pair of glasses. Blake suddenly felt that all of his attributes had increased by a lot. He glanced at his sleeping roommates. Then he sat up quietly. He took out the pair of leather shoes. After putting on the leather shoes that fit just right, he stood up and walked around twice. Then he was surprised to find his entire body seemed to have become much lighter. Not bad, not bad. These pieces of equipment were indeed a huge boost to one's combat power. Those with good attributes could be brought by themselves. Those with bad attributes could be directly decomposed. The decomposed materials could be used to upgrade the hovering cloak. It could also be used when a good equipment blueprint was opened. It could be used to create better equipment for himself. It was quite good. Blake walked around for a while. He took off all the equipment. He lay down again. He had opened all the silver treasure chests. Next, it was time to open the gold treasure chests. But it was another 10 gold treasure chests. It was 10 in a row. Or directly from the diamond treasure chests. He thought of the magical items from the diamond treasure chests. Blake's heart was itching. Although he also wanted to see what the upgraded gold treasure chests could bring out. That was a diamond treasure chest. If he could get another piece of equipment similar to the hovering cloak. Or a magic board similar to the druid's magic board. Wouldn't that increase his strength again? Blake sighed. Gold treasure chests are common, but diamond treasure chests are not. System, merge. Open the diamond treasure chest. Ding. Opening the diamond treasure chest for the host. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the magical version of the Love Horse Chicken Kill. Quote. Blake looked at the prompt message with a dumbfounded expression. Love Horse Chicken Kill. Hiss, this is not a one-man world. Is this Wang Juncho's unique skill, Love Horse Chicken Kill? This was a very strange skill. The basic principle was, after the enemy was hit by the Love Horse Chicken Kill, the user's force, it would massage the nerves all over the opponent's body at a subtle frequency. And it would vibrate various glands in the opponent's body. It would secrete. It would make the enemy feel so good that they couldn't stand up. They would lose the ability to move and be at the mercy of others. Ding. The magical version of the Love Horse Chicken Kill is triggered by magic. Therefore, whether it was a close combat or a curse attack, it could be activated. After listening to the system prompt, Blake scratched his head. Why did this skill look so strange? Then a scene appeared in Blake's mind. A group of Death Eaters fell in front of Blake. Then he shouted in a trembling voice, "It's so good." Hiss, Blake shuddered. He couldn't stand it. But this skill was actually very powerful. As long as it hit. No matter what spell was used. It could trigger the effect. With one hit, the enemy would lose the ability to move. It was ridiculously strong. And, most importantly, the corners of Blake's mouth began to curl up slightly again. Who said this skill could only be used on enemies? Ha ha ha. Mimi. Mimi. Blake couldn't help but laugh softly. Of course. Blake, who was full of healthy thoughts. He didn't notice at all. Wayne was pretending to be asleep with his head covered. It's over, boss might be possessed by a ghost. He'll get up and walk around in a while. And then he'll laugh weirdly. It's so creepy. Good morning, Professor Sprout. Quote. Good morning. On the way to the Hufflepuff common room. Every little wizard who met Professor Sprout politely said hello to their dean. Professor Sprout also responded enthusiastically. It was like this every day. In fact, she had to come to the lounge every morning. The strange plants in the common room. She took care of them herself. These plants could emit an aura that made the little wizards feel happy. It had a very strong calming effect. It could effectively relieve the little wizard's stress. But it was more difficult to take care of. She had to do it herself. So Professor Sprout didn't feel that anything was wrong at first. As more and more young wizards greeted her, more and more people greeted her. She realized that something was wrong. It wasn't that the little wizards in Hufflepuff didn't greet her when they met before. 2. Usually at this time, in the Hufflepuff common room, she didn't meet many little wizards in Hufflepuff. Because of these children, they were very lazy. Until the last moment. They would never get up for class. It was only 7:00 for Hogwarts, which had classes at 9:00. Most of the little badgers were still in bed at this time. What happened today? Was there a festival? Otherwise, why would it be so late? She met so many little wizards from her own school. Could it be that something happened? Professor Sprout was suspicious. She quickly sped up to the Hufflepuff common room. When she opened the door to the common room. When she entered the familiar Hufflepuff common room. Professor Sprout was stunned. What did she see? At this time before, the Hufflepuff common room was basically empty. Only a few house elves were quietly cleaning the house. Replenishing the food on the table. But now, the common room was full of people. The little badgers weren't quietly reading books. They were just gathered together to discuss their homework. The little wizard who just left must have left because there were no more seats in the common room. So they went to the library to study. Otherwise, why would they all have books and quills? Professor Sprout was stunned for a while. Then she wanted to go out and check. She wanted to see if she went to the wrong common room. She ran to the Ravenclaw common room. But, this familiar face, this familiar environment. I must have woken up today. Or I am dreaming now. The little wizards in Hufflepuff are working hard. How could I have such a dream? Oh, if only it was real. Professor Sprout suddenly. When the little wizards in the common room found out that she was here. They all stood Sprout. She looked at him, affectionately. Morning, Professor Sprout. Quote. Professor Sprout was startled by the greetings of the young wizards. This is not normal. This is not normal. If this was not a dream. Children, did you do something wrong? Tell me what you did, and I will find a way to help you. A little wizard from Hufflepuff suddenly spoke. Look. This is our dean. Our Professor Sprout. Quote. I thought that after we made a mistake, our first reaction was not to punish or deduct points. Instead, he wants to help us settle it. Really? Professor Sprout, you are so kind. Quote. That's right. Blake was right. Professor Sprout is so kind. Quote. Professor Sprout. We were too selfish. Quote. Yes. We didn't know you had done so much for us. Quote. That's right. People always said that we entered the academy because we were stupid. Quote. But we didn't feel ashamed, and we didn't want to make progress. We are so sorry. Now you're being ridiculed as well. We can't stand it anymore. We must win this year's school championship. That's right. Not only the school championship. We must win the school Quidditch Cup. Quote. These were the members of Hufflepuff's Quidditch team. In the last school year, they lost to Slytherin and Gryffindor. They were even almost turned around by Ravenclaw. This year, without any reinforcement, the hope of winning the championship was still very low. If we continue like this, if we don't work harder, we are going to lose to Slytherin soon. After we lose, Slytherin will lose to Gryffindor soon. When we lose to Ravenclaw, you guys are so shameless. The captain angrily scolded the team members for not making progress. Cedric's eyes were red. He roared, "Captain, take us with you and charge forward again." Quote. In the lounge, the atmosphere of the Hufflepuff Wizards instantly became lively. Professor Sprout looked at the lively lounge in a daze. She still didn't understand what had happened. How did it change overnight? Why did these kids become so motivated? And they seemed very grateful to her. Although it was good to be motivated. However, he still had to figure out the reason for this. What's going on? I mean, why did you suddenly think of working hard? Cedric, who was holding a broom, came over. Professor. It was Blake's words that reminded us. Quote. Cedric relayed Blake's words from the night before. Professor Sprout almost burst into tears. It started when she was in school. Hufflepuff was said to be a school that only idiots would join. Until she became the dean. She was still criticized. Although she was used to being criticized. But who wanted to be looked at with prejudice all the time? When Professor Sprout heard Cedric's words. Without Professor Sprout to carry the burden for us, how could we have a peaceful life? She couldn't help it anymore. Children, you are all good children. Okay. Since we have all made up our minds. Quote. Then, starting today, let's show the people from other schools. What is the real Hufflepuff? We have to prove it to them. Hufflepuff is definitely not a school that only idiots will join. Okay. Warm applause resounded through the Hufflepuff Common Lounge. In Blake's dormitory. When Blake, the initiator of the whole thing. When he was woken up by his own smell again. He looked at the pile of treasure chests that suddenly appeared in the system space and fell into deep thought. In the auditorium. In the faculty seats. Professor Sprout was eating breakfast. But her eyes were red. She soon attracted Professor McGonagall's attention. Pomona, what's wrong with you? Professor McGonagall asked in surprise. Nothing, Minerva. I'm just very touched. Quote. Touched. That's right, the children have suddenly become sensible. What's wrong? Dumbledore also came. He didn't come to the auditorium for breakfast often. He just came once. And checked on the students' condition. He didn't expect to see Professor Sprout with red eyes. He remembered Blake's occasional naughty behavior. His heart trembled. Did that little guy get into trouble? After all, she was his child. If she got into trouble, as her parent, naturally, he had to help solve it. Is it Blake's child? Dumbledore asked tentatively. Sprout remembered Sprout. Hufflepuff finally pulled himself together. It was all because Blake's words. And she didn't expect. She had been the dean for so many years. No one could truly understand her pain. Yet, a new student could understand her so well. Her efforts were discovered and understood. In an instant, she felt that all her silent efforts over the years were worth it. Yes. Professor Sprout said. It's that child. Dumbledore's chest tightened when he got the answer. Dumbledore didn't know what Sprout was thinking. He just thought that Blake did something out of line. He actually made the professor so angry that he cried. How could this be? At this moment, he was already thinking about what to do. Only when he didn't go overboard. He had to bring this child back to the right path. Suddenly, Dumbledore saw Blake with two boys. He walked into the auditorium. Blake! Dumbledore shouted seriously. The other little wizards in the auditorium turned to look at the faculty seats. They found that it was Dumbledore who was shouting. They couldn't help but look curiously at Blake, who was walking up. Blake was different from the other students who were rolled up. He just got up. He was wearing the equipment that he got last night. He felt the increase in his strength. He happily prepared to go to the dining table. He was ready to eat. Then he heard someone calling him. He looked up and saw Dumbledore with a serious face. Blake's heart skipped a beat. Did I do something wrong? But he had done too many bad things yesterday. Even he didn't know which one it was. When Blake came to the faculty seat, Dumbledore saw the guilty and confused look on his face. He felt that he had guessed it correctly. He sighed. Blake, do you know what you did? How could you? Oh. Thank you, Blake. I didn't think that you, whom I've never met before, would actually understand me. Cedric told me everything. Now, everyone in Hufflepuff cheered up. Well, it's all thanks to you. Professor Dumbledore, can I give him extra credit? Dumbledore was stunned. He didn't finish his sentence. After hearing Professor Sprout's words, he knew that he had misunderstood this kid. It seemed that this kid had done something good. And he had moved Professor Sprout to tears. At this time, Blake still didn't know what was going on. It must have been after Cedric's self-promotion last night. It caused a chain reaction. But he didn't expect it. The two sentences that he said casually. But it happened to be what Professor Sprout was thinking. Professor Sprout thanked him. But why did Dumbledore ask him to come up? To accept Professor Sprout's gratitude. It can't be, right? Blake looked at Dumbledore in confusion. Then, she noticed his slightly awkward expression. Hiss, Professor Dumbledore, did you think I was naughty and made the professor cry? Ah. No, I'm just. Well, I suddenly remembered that I still have something to do. So, I have to go, Pomona. You can give me extra credit for this matter. Dumbledore said and quickly left. Don't blame Professor Dumbledore. Kid, he just misunderstood. I see, Professor Sprout glanced at Professor McGonagall. Then he said, because of you, all the children in Hufflepuff are working harder. So, I think you should get extra points. Minerva, what do you think? Professor McGonagall said after hearing the conversation. He roughly understood. Therefore, she had no objection to the bonus points. In fact, if only Gryffindor had a child who could get the Cubs moving, she would definitely give him bonus points. Therefore, she nodded and agreed with Professor Sprout. Blake, you've won 50 points for Hufflepuff. Professor Sprout said with a smile. Professor McGonagall's mouth twitched. If only these 50 points were added to Gryffindor. Yesterday, Gryffindor deducted 30 points from the Weasley twins' King's Jow. However, Professor McGonagall didn't think that Professor Sprout's reward of 50 points was excessive. This was because Blake had united all the little magi in Hufflepuff Academy and made them more motivated. These 50 points were only a small number. It was only the second day of school. So, because of Blake, these 50 points. In the hourglass of the Academy. In the hourglass that belonged to Hufflepuff. The diamonds clattered to the ground. In just an instant, Hufflepuff's points had reached first place. This made every little magus of Hufflepuff who had passed through the hourglass extremely excited. Look, our Hufflepuff is the best. With a little effort, they would immediately reach first place. However, everyone saw Blake go to the teacher's seat. Then, Hufflepuff's diamonds rose. Therefore, everyone was guessing. These 50 points must have been earned by Blake. So, when Blake returned to the long table, when he was ready to eat, the little magi of Hufflepuff at the table were all extremely friendly to him. This was the second day of school. And the first class of the second day. It was Professor Quirrell, who was possessed by Voldemort, who was in charge. Defense against black magic class. Compared to the excited looks of the other students, Blake was much calmer. Others didn't know Professor Quirrell's teaching level. He knew. So he wasn't looking forward to it at all. However, if Quirrell wanted to hide so smoothly, he would be able to do so. How could it be so easy? Have you asked me, the boss of Hogwarts? Although Voldemort's condition was very bad. But, the level of the treasure chest that dropped must not be low. Blake thought for a moment. Then, he had an idea in his mind. He decided to have a good meeting with Quirrell. Or rather, it was Voldemort who would be possessed by Quirrell later. Why don't you apologize to that child properly? Dumbledore sat behind his desk. He smiled awkwardly. After the incident with Tom, it had already caused him to be a little stressed out. That was why he habitually thought of things in a bad direction. That was why he subconsciously misunderstood Blake. He thought that he had done something bad. But he didn't expect that. Not only did that child not do what he thought, he did something bad. He actually did a good deed. He inspired most of the children in the entire academy to be positive and motivated. He even said something that touched the professor's heart. Such a kind and smart child. He actually suspected that he had done something bad. This sigh I'm really getting worse and worse. I should have apologized to him on the spot. Dumbledore shook his head. He had been carefree all his life. Why was he making a mistake for a mere face now? Then, Dumbledore began to think. How could he make it up to that child? Although that child didn't say it. But he knew. It didn't feel good to be wronged. He had to quickly get rid of this bad influence. Otherwise, what if this child refused to do good deeds in the future? Just as Dumbledore was about to get up, he went to find Blake to apologize seriously. An owl suddenly flew in from the window. It dropped a red letter. It turned around and flew away. When Dumbledore saw the letter, his face froze slightly. A howling letter. He hadn't received a howling letter for a long time. Dumbledore thought for a moment. He realized that he hadn't done anything particularly controversial recently. Who would send him a howling letter? Dumbledore decided to listen. But, of course, he couldn't let the sound of the letter spread. Dumbledore waved his magic wand. A big bubble appeared in the air. The bubble flew over. It enveloped the howling letter that was about to explode. Then, Dumbledore waved his magic wand. He let the envelope open. Ga la la la. The envelope automatically transformed into the shape of a mouth. It began to roar. However, under Dumbledore's spell, the sound of the roar letter was about the same as an ordinary person's voice. After hearing the sound of the roaring letter, Dumbledore's face froze. Because, Dumbledore, you old fool. That kid Blake clearly did a good deed for 370. But you suspect him of doing bad things. If I had known, I wouldn't have given you the clue to Blake's background. You can't even take care of Blake. Think about it. Even his basic necessities were taken care of by my house elves. What did you do? He even cooks for you in your house. Is this what you meant by taking care of him? Also, when he went to school. Quote, I'm going to take your Hogwarts Express train. She actually went to the station alone. Don't you know how to send him off personally? Yes, I know you're the principal. Very busy. Quote, but, do you have to be so busy that you don't even have time to send a child to the train? Quote, with your level, you can send him to the train and then use phantom transference to return to your school. How much time can it take? You don't know. The house elves reported to me. Quote, when Blake was watching other people on the train being sent off by their parents. How envious was the expression on his face. If he hadn't met a few good friends before entering the school. At that moment, he would have been depressed. The roaring letter scolded Dumbledore for more than 10 minutes. However, the reason why Dumbledore's face became very bad. It wasn't because the roaring letter scolded him. It was because the person who sent the message to him. It was actually Grindelwald. The Grindelwald who was locked up in Numungard. It was fine if it was Grindelwald. After all, Dumbledore had long known that he actually had a background. But since Grindelwald didn't come out himself, it could be considered as fulfilling his promise. Then sending a letter was within his tolerance. What had just happened on his side? How did he find out immediately? He even sent him a roaring letter that lasted for more than 10 minutes. This meant that it had just happened. Even Dumbledore hadn't returned to the office yet. He had already started recording the roaring letter. This proved one point. That was because Grindelwald had been secretly watching this child all this time. Why was he so concerned about this child? Although this was indeed his bloodline. But Dumbledore didn't believe it, given his personality. He would do this for a child he had never met. So much effort. Or could it be that this guy still hadn't given up? Could it be that he still had the evil intention of turning this child into a sharp sword in his hands? The more Dumbledore thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. Grindelwald was very good at instigating. What if Blake, that child, was led into a ditch by him in a daze? The more Dumbledore thought about it, the more serious it became. He suddenly stood up. Baker. Come out. Quote. The headmaster's office was silent. Only the portraits of the headmasters on the wall were looking at Dumbledore in surprise. Dumbledore took a deep breath. He tried to speak as calmly as possible. Baker, I know you're at Hogwarts. Come out. I have a message for you to pass on to your old master. Pa. The house elf, Baker, appeared in front of Dumbledore timidly. Because he also recognized Blake as his master. In other words, Dumbledore, who had the same bloodline as Blake. He could be considered his master. Since he was at Hogwarts, facing Dumbledore's summons, he couldn't refuse. Dumbledore looked at the elf in front of him. Naturally, he knew about it now. Grindelwald knew the news so quickly. It must be this little thing who reported it. Help me relay these words to Grindelwald word for word. Stay out of Blake's matters. I can tolerate you paying attention to that child's growth through the house elf. I can also tolerate you writing to me and giving me advice. Because, I admit that you were right in your shouting letter, I did do something wrong. But, I absolutely can't tolerate you directly interfering with that child's education. Quote. Between you and him, you can only communicate through me. You can't touch that child yourself. Quote. Dumbledore straightened his body. Baker, do you remember? Yes, Baker nodded. Then go, don't miss a word. Yes, yes. Numungard. Grindelwald angrily threw the notebook in his hand. You, Dumbledore, are taking care of the child. Can you carry it? You can't. You don't have that ability, you know that. At this moment, Blake obviously didn't know. Because of him, Dumbledore and Grindelwald started fighting again. The current him, she was holding a textbook. Together with two roommates. He walked towards the Defense Against Black Magic classroom. Dabau quietly poked his head out of his pocket. The pocket created by the levitating cloak also came with the traceless stretch spell. It could fit a sniff completely. When Blake came to the classroom, many people were already seated in the classroom. Hermione is sitting in a chair in the third row. He studied the Defense Against Black Magic textbook seriously. At this time, Wayne and Roger also discovered Hermione. Boss, said Roger suddenly. This time, do you want to continue comforting that girl? Quote. Nonsense. Boss will definitely go. Didn't you see that there's still no one sitting beside that girl? Quote. This proves that boss's consolation didn't work. That girl still hasn't made any friends. Our boss is a partner of justice. Of course I won't sit by and watch. Boss. Come on. We support you. Quote. After Wayne finished saying a bunch of nonsense, he pulled Roger and ran away. What the fool. Blake wanted to cry but had no tears. But this nonsense was made up by him last night. He could only blame himself. But, for Blake, whose skin was as thick as a city wall, it was fine to sit directly next to Hermione. Good morning. Hermione idiographic period. Have you had breakfast? I didn't see you in the auditorium this morning. Hermione raised his head and glanced at Blake angrily. Excuse me, what time did you get up? 8:30, you didn't get up early to prepare the textbook, did you? Hermione said, of course. I have to prepare first. Otherwise, what if I don't understand what the professor says later? Quote. I don't think you need to prepare, because Professor Quirrell will read it to you again later. Quirrell's teaching style was very simple. As a defense against black magic professor, he would not demonstrate if he could. He would stutter and read the textbook. He would talk about the vampire story he made up. He would try his best to clear his suspicion. Then he would persist until the class was over. He would have completed the mission. He could even not bring his wand in his class. How do you know? You didn't take Professor Quirrell's class. Because someone took it yesterday, I heard it from them. Huh. Hermione suddenly saw Dabau in Blake's pocket. What's this? Dabau's cute appearance was very touching. Sure enough, Hermione immediately took it. Oh, this is my pet, Dabau. Blake said. He took Dabau out of his pocket. So cute. Can I touch it? Quote. Of course. Dabau sat up. He pointed at Hermione and gestured. Squeak squeak squeak. What kind of class are you? You want to touch me too? Quote. Blake raised his hand. He pressed it on Dabau's body. Love horse killing chicken. Squeak. OWO. Dabau won Blake's love horse killing chicken. He was so happy that his small eyes rolled back. He fell on the table and couldn't resist anymore. Wow. It's so cute. I touched it. It seems very comfortable. Quote. Blake's movements. Hermione didn't notice. He thought that his technique was very professional. At this moment, Dabau was so happy that he felt weak all over. He allowed Hermione to do whatever he wanted. Naturally, he couldn't object anymore. At this moment, the cute Dabau attracted all the girls in the classroom. After all, this thing was indeed very cute. He saw the girls surrounding him. A tear slowly flowed down from the corner of Dabao's eye. Squeak, boss, you're not human. You're not human. Quote. Blake patted Dabao's head. Thank you for your hard work. Then, he quietly stuffed a gold coin into its paw. Dabao touched the gold coin. He sat up in a flash. With an excited face, he stuffed the gold coin into his small pocket. Squeak squeak squeak. Can't you just give me money next time? Quote. Dabao, who had received the money, changed from its dead fish-like state. It began to act cute crazily on the table. Wow. It's so smart. Quote. Ah, it's so furry. It's so soft. Little Sniff was born to be eaten by its mother. Rua. Hey, whose mother are you? Wayne looked at the girls surrounding him with envy and jealousy. Roger, you said I should buy another Sniff now. Is it too late? Quote. What? Do you still want your pants to be buttonless? Quote. Quote. And quiet, we're going to start class. Professor Quirrell said timidly. It came from outside the door. He looked at everyone and forced a smile. He looked timid. He saw the professor coming. The girls returned to their seats. However, Hannah moved her textbook over. Sitting on the right side of Hermione. This, sir, please keep your pet. Quirrell stuttered as he looked at Blake. I'm sorry, Professor. Blake grabbed Dabao. She stuffed it into the drawer. Creak creak creak. Closed. Quote. Love horse kills chicken. Squeak, it feels so good. Then, Dabao couldn't scream anymore. Lying quietly in the drawer. However, Hermione and Hannah would secretly stroke it from time to time. Dabao, who was doing business for money, didn't resist at all. Ahem, let's start today's Black Defense Against Black Magic class. Let's take attendance first. Blake secretly gave Quirrell a thumbs up. Brilliant. Based on the speed at which he stuttered and spoke. If they were to call the names of all the little wizards in the classroom, then, 1/3 of the class would be cut off. After taking attendance with great difficulty, Quirrell finally began his lecture. Hermione was very serious at first. Holding a quill, she was ready to take notes at any time. She was also ready to raise her hand to answer questions. After a while, she was disappointed. It was the same as what Blake said. Quirrell really began to stutter as he read the textbook. The disappointed Hermione could only put down the quill. She reached into the drawer. She continued to rub Dabao. She would rather play with Dabao than listen to him read the textbook. Reading the textbook without any nutrition. Plus, Professor Quirrell's strong garlic smell. Everyone in the classroom was in a state of dizziness. After a long time, Quirrell finally finished reading today's textbook. There was still 1/3 of the time left. Blake couldn't help but want to applaud him. This time control. Amazing. Next, in order to explain black magic, the danger of living things. Let me tell everyone a story that I personally experienced. At that time, I went to Africa. A prince there was deeply troubled by zombies. Based on his narration speed. After the class, he might not be able to finish the whole story. As expected of you. But, how could Blake let him do as he wished? Blake suddenly raised her hand. This student, do you have any questions? Blake asked with a look of admiration on her face. Professor Quirrell, you can actually defeat zombies. That's amazing. Quote. Can you tell me, how did you defeat zombies? I am. Quirrell obviously didn't expect this. Someone would ask him the key to the question directly. In fact, he hadn't finished making it up yet. After all, according to his speculation. Before he talked about how to defeat the zombies. The bell should have rung after class. There was no need to make it up. This student didn't talk about martial arts ethics. He asked directly. The careless Quirrell didn't dodge. He had to make it up on the spot. But, in a hurry. He couldn't make it up. So, he stuttered for a long time. He had to be vague. He wanted to muddle through. Well, in fact, the strong sunlight is the best weapon against the zombies. Oh, the weather today is very good, the sun is very warm. Quirrell reluctantly changed the topic to the weather. But, Blake didn't pay attention to his reluctance to change the topic. Instead, he continued to look at Quirrell with admiration. I heard that professor had excellent grades when you were in school. Not long after graduation, you were rehired as a professor of defense against black magic. You are my role model. Oh, is that so? You are exaggerating. Quirrell couldn't deal with Blake anymore. Hermione looked at Blake suspiciously. She didn't understand what this guy was up to. The level of this guy's lecture. Everyone knew that he wasn't good. She didn't understand why Blake would say such mushy words with admiration. Blake ignored Hermione's rolling eyes. He continued to speak. It turns out that you are really excellent, Professor. I heard from many seniors that over the years, there have been people who applied for the position of Professor of Defense against Black Magic right after graduation. However, those who thought they were extremely talented were all rejected. Only you were rehired. Isn't that enough to prove your excellence? Quote. I think you are better than those who applied for this position before. Blake's voice had just faded. Quirrell was so scared that he almost fell to the ground. You can't just say that. What do you mean? Who are you hinting at? Are you trying to harm me? Back then, after Voldemort graduated. Thus, he applied for the position of defensive black magic professor. Later, the principal at the time, Armando Dippet, accepted Dumbledore's suggestion. He rejected Voldemort at that time. He said he was still too young. Let him gain some experience before applying. Now, Blake directly said that he was better than the people who had applied for this position as soon as they graduated. Didn't they just say that Quirrell was better than Voldemort? Quirrell's body went numb. This little thing was spouting nonsense. On the surface, it looked like he was praising himself. But in reality, he was roasting himself on the fire. Voldemort was attached to the back of Quirrell's head. So how was Voldemort feeling? Quirrell could feel it clearly. And just now, he clearly felt a surge of anger rushing to the top of his head. It was not his own anger, of course. As for who it belonged to. Wasn't that obvious? No. I used to be a Muggle studies professor. Quote. I've only started teaching defensive black magic this year. I wasn't hired as a defensive black magic professor as soon as I graduated. Quirrell was so scared that he couldn't even stutter. This scene could be called a medical miracle. So I'm completely incomparable to those who have the confidence to apply for a professorship as soon as they graduate. Yes. Far from it. Quote. After Quirrell said this, sure enough, Voldemort's mood calmed down a little. Although after he went back, a round of torture was inevitable. 182. At least it wasn't that serious. Blake smiled slightly. He accepted a silver treasure chest that was generated due to fear. After another gold treasure chest that was generated due to anger. He continued to deal damage. But, Professor Quirrell, didn't you apply for a teaching position as soon as you graduated? Although you started as a Muggle studies professor. But, the application was successful. And Principal Dumbledore asked you to change your teaching position from Muggle studies to defensive black magic professor. Doesn't this mean that your excellence has been recognized by Professor Dumbledore? This is much better than those who were rejected as soon as they applied, right? As soon as Blake finished speaking, Quirrell could only feel the back of his head. The anger that had been suppressed for the time being surged up again. Ouch. What are you doing? Ouch. Quote. Quirrell was going crazy. He racked his brains. It took him a lot of effort to calm Voldemort's anger. This guy only said a few words. He provoked Voldemort's anger again. Tell me, why did you provoke him? You made him angry. As soon as you finished class, you could just leave. What about me? When the time comes, I'll be suppressed by him. Isn't it still me? You fool. Quirrell hated Blake, that little fool, to the core. He saw Blake's expression of admiration. He wanted to give him 2 slaps. And so his mouth shut. But he still had to force a smile to face Blake's question. It couldn't be helped. He was obviously praising him. What would you do if he praised you? Thank you for your compliment. But I really can't afford it. Quirrell was on the verge of tears. The person at the back of Quirrell's head was really angry. He felt that the back of his head was burning. Quirrell felt that the back of his head was about to catch fire. Ding. Extremely angry emotions have been detected. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a diamond treasure chest. Quote. Blake was overjoyed. As expected of you, Voldemort. The drop rate is really high. A gold treasure chest at once. And a diamond treasure chest. As for the few silver treasure chests that Quirrell dropped, those are all just bonuses. No, you can afford it. No, I can't afford it. Quirrell glanced at the time helplessly. Because it's a long class. So there's still 40 minutes before class ends. How am I going to spend these 40 minutes? Quirrell was about to go crazy. Classmate, that's enough. Let's go back to the previous story. Quirrell had no choice. He had to be tough, which was rare. He forcefully pulled the topic back. Blake smiled slightly. He didn't continue to pester him. A gold treasure chest and a diamond treasure chest. It's about time. I should stop while I'm ahead. There will be plenty of opportunities in the future, right? Quirrell saw that Blake had finally shut up. He heaved a huge sigh of relief in his heart. Finally. It's over. Although after class, I'm about to be punished by my master. 18 euros. At least I don't have to suffer anymore. Voldemort was at the back of his head. So Voldemort's emotions fluctuated too much. It'll give him a splitting headache. Just as Quirrell was about to continue his boring story. It's delayed until class ends. A hoarse voice appeared in his mind. Give me control of the body. Master, what are you going to do? Give it to me. You can't be impulsive. This is Hogwarts. Quote. Dumbledore, that old guy, has always been here. I know what to do. Give me control of your body. Quote. Voldemort's request is irrefutable. So, in everyone's eyes, Quirrell, who was telling a boring story, suddenly stopped. He lowered his head. Then he raised it again. The little wizard in the classroom suddenly had an illusion. Professor Quirrell. His temperament seems to be different. Blake's eyes lit up. Good heavens, this is Voldemort. Quirrell's temperament. Quirrell took a deep look at Blake. Then he suddenly laughed. Those tedious stories are only told. It's still too boring. Quote. If that's the case, then let's give it a demonstration. Quirrell's. Waving. Quirrell had prepared the writing on the blackboard and the accompanying pictures. Then, they all disappeared into thin air. At the same time, the huge podium was also moved to the other side. Of course. Let's start the demonstration. When you met the dark sorcerers outside, Roland said. How are you going to face them? I'm going to invite a classmate up here. Then we can demonstrate. Quirrell finished. His eyes fell on Blake's face. Blake felt a hint of danger in his eyes. But, danger. I don't believe that you, Tom, dare to touch me in Dumbledore's hall. Even if you dare to touch me, then my wand might be hard. Then, Blake purposely put on a pleasantly surprised expression. Then, he raised his hand high in the air. Professor. Let me do it. Quote. Blake's performance. He was a complete fan of Quirrell. Quirrell's lips flashed a cruel smile. Then come up here. You're Blake Green, right? Yes. Professor Quirrell. Come up here. Blake couldn't wait to run up. At this moment, they were originally sleepy. Then because Blake was wildly admiring Quirrell's behavior. And the little wizards who had goosebumps all over their bodies. Their spirits and interest were finally piqued. After all, this was a demonstration of actual combat. It was much more interesting than the boring storytelling just now. At this moment, no one cared why Quirrell suddenly stopped stuttering. Then, take out your wand, child. Quirrell stood in front of Blake with his wand in 2 fingers. Blake glanced at Quirrell's wand gesture. His posture is so arrogant, so awesome. And you say you're not. Is it Tom? Okay. Blake didn't dare to be careless. He directly took out his custom wand. The custom wand at this time. It had long been disguised by Blake to look like a mithril wand. So it looked long and thick. It was like a small iron rod. Quirrell saw Blake's wand. He couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, now, let's say you're a dark wizard. You're preparing to attack me. Come, use the spell your best at to attack me. Then I'll show you how to deal with it. When Blake heard this, how could he not understand? This guy wanted to teach him a small lesson. As long as he attacked him. Then when he counterattacked. With a little trick, he could make him suffer a big loss. Although he might not dare to kill him. But he would definitely have to suffer for a long time. Tisk, why was this Tom so petty? Could it be that he had been in this state for too long? So he was getting crazier and crazier. Very likely. He had lost this bit of shrewdness. He was far worse than Tom when he first started his business. Professor. I don't know how to attack spells. I haven't learned it yet. Blake pretended to be ashamed. Under the podium, Hermione's mind was full of question marks. Blake didn't know how to attack spells. Then how did he defeat the hidden monster back then? This guy had been very strange since just now. What was he trying to do? It's okay. I'll teach you one now. Quote. Everyone can also learn from me. This is one of the most common spells in black magic defense. Everyone, listen to me recite the spell. Remove your weapon. Then, just under Blake's influence, Harry Potter actually became his old enemy. Voldemort's subordinate. After learning the incantation of this predestined spell. Okay, are you ready? Then come on. Blake sighed softly in his heart. Actually, he didn't quite understand. Why was Voldemort so impatient this time? According to the original work, he had been lying low until the last moment. Why this time? After being teased by him casually. Why did he have to teach him a lesson? Was he not afraid of being exposed? Just now, he said that he didn't know how to cast a curse. He just wanted to see if Voldemort would get impatient. Then, he would give up on his impulsive behavior. Obviously, he seemed to have muttered about Voldemort's madness. There was also the degree of vengeance. Come on, attack me. Quirrell stood where he was, calm and unruffled. Blake held his wand. He didn't dare to be careless. Since that was the case. Fluorescent flicker. Blake's spell of illumination was thanks to Gandalf's magic board. Therefore, the bonus was 100 million points. Other people's flashing fluorescent lights could at most be used as a small flashlight. And his fluorescent light flickered. It was like a flash bomb. Wow. My eyes. Quote. Everyone couldn't help but close their eyes. Quirrell was shocked. On the one hand, he was shocked by Blake's abnormal illumination spell. On one hand, it was unexpected. He thought that Blake would use the disarm charm. It was a flashbang. Quirrell raised his hand and cast an iron armor spell. There was no other way. After all, this was Quirrell's useless body. Voldemort used less than 1/10 of his magic power. After his vision was temporarily deprived, he had to put down the protective shield first. In this way, even if he couldn't see anything, Blake's disarm charm couldn't hit him. Quirrell's body suddenly stiffened. Then, the real Quirrell suddenly felt that he had regained control of his body. He immediately felt a sense of shameful pleasure. And it was a very, very pleasurable kind. Ah. Without Voldemort's control, Quirrell. He immediately lay on the ground. It was too pleasurable. Blake smiled and looked at Quirrell on the ground. The magical version of the love horse kill chicken. Any spell. It could be triggered. Of course, that included the illumination spell. As long as you were hit by my holy light. Then you would be hit by my love horse kill chicken. Of course, this was about the transmission of magic power. As long as others blocked it with the iron armor spell in advance. Then even if they were hit by his illumination spell, they wouldn't be hit. However, Voldemort was careless. The iron armor spell was only used later. This led to him being directly ambushed by Blake. Of course, this was also because there was no such outrageous skill in this world. That was why Blake was able to succeed so easily. But this skill could control the target. So the others in the classroom were fine. Blake saw that the people in the classroom were still covering their eyes. And so, oh no. Professor Quirrell's old illness has relapsed. Quote. Quirrell, who was lying on the ground. You fooling corpse. So, you just cast an illumination spell. And then Professor Quirrell relapsed. In the principal's office, Dumbledore asked in an uncertain tone. Yes, Professor. You can trust me. Because the students who were present at the time can testify for me. Blake looked at Dumbledore with a firm gaze. His expression was calm. Dumbledore nodded. Okay, I got it. He didn't intend to pursue this matter further. Quirrell had a big problem to begin with. Dumbledore thought. Maybe it was because of Blake's illumination spell. It triggered the aftereffects of Quirrell being possessed by Voldemort. That was why Quirrell collapsed. However, now was not the time to expose Quirrell. What's with your illumination spell? Blake's illumination spell was too exaggerated. The fluorescent light flashed. It could only make a little light at the tip of the wand. It was like a small flashlight. Blake's illumination spell was like a flash bomb. At that time, the entire classroom was blinded by his flash bomb. And the amazing thing was, after Madame Pomfrey's later examination, the students' eyes were not damaged at all. This was placed in any kind of strong light. It was impossible. I'm sorry, Professor, I don't know why my illumination spell is like this. At that time, Professor Quirrell said that he wanted to practice with me. Let me find a way to attack him. That's what I thought. I'm sure he'll be able to easily block my attacks. So I thought that maybe I could use the illumination spell to shake his eyes. And then launch an attack. I didn't expect that when I was anxious, I would. Dumbledore's expression was a little serious. Because he realized. Blake's magic sometimes seemed to be unstable. This time the illumination spell. Just like the explosion of the magic wand earlier. Maybe it was caused by his magic riot at that moment. Of course, this was Dumbledore's own guess. He didn't know if this guess was right. Dumbledore decided. He would have to ask Grindelwald later. Since he also cared about this child. Furthermore, this child was born from one of his experiments. In that case, he should know something. Alright. Blake, you don't have to worry about this. Quote. It's not your fault. In that case, your idea of using the illumination spell would have worked. But, you're just underestimating the power of your spell. I'll try to figure out what's going on with your body. Don't worry. Quote. Blake nodded. He was about to turn around and leave. Wait, Dumbledore suddenly called out to Blake. Blake stopped. He looked at Dumbledore in confusion. Dumbledore stood up. He came out from behind his desk. What happened this morning? I misunderstood you. I think I should apologize to you for saving the child. You can make a request of me. As long as I can do it. Blake looked at Dumbledore in surprise. To be honest, he had almost forgotten about the misunderstanding in the morning. It was just a small matter. He didn't expect Dumbledore to be so serious. However, Blake didn't refuse. Since Dumbledore already said so. If he didn't make a request, didn't that mean he wasn't willing to forgive him? Then, I'll make a request. Dumbledore nodded. He looked at him with a smile. I, Miss Briar. Blake said in a serious tone. Blake, you can't raise a Briar in Hogwarts. We've already discussed this issue before. Dumbledore said helplessly. Okay, Blake said regretfully. But, Dumbledore suddenly paused. Maybe you can treat Hagrid to a cup of tea. Okay. Professor. Thank you. Quote. Blake said in surprise. After walking out of the headmaster's office, Blake was in a good mood. Today, not only did he get Voldemort and Quirrell, the resentful pair. He got a gold chest and a diamond chest. And he could even bring Briar over. If Briar came over, then the experiment that was interrupted when school started. He could continue. The druid's magic could grow plants. It could also strengthen animals. Big Bear was originally just an ordinary bear. But when Blake was at home, he would use the druid's magic to strengthen it every day. He just wanted to make Briar's body strong again. To make up for the loss of its body in the circus. But one day, he suddenly realized. As an ordinary bear, Briar. It suddenly became extraordinary. He was actually in its body. He felt the magic in the body of a magical animal. But it was still very weak. So, Blake started the experiment. That is, if he continuously strengthened Briar. Could Briar evolve into a magical animal? If even Briar could evolve into a magical animal, then other magical animals, under the druid's strengthening power, could their strength also undergo a qualitative leap? Blake felt that this was a very interesting experiment. Once it succeeded, then the magical animals he tamed in the future would become extremely powerful. Some powerful magical animals. Perhaps, he might even be able to advance. In the auditorium, the little wizards were eating. But their topic today, they were all focused on the defense against black magic class in the morning. Blake's exaggerated illumination spell. It directly triggered Professor Quirrell's old problem. The young adepts couldn't help but talk about this with great interest. After all, Hogwarts had been around for many years. He had never seen a professor fail at the hands of a little first-year adept. At Hufflepuff's long table, the first-year Badgers were eating together. I didn't expect Blake to praise Professor Quirrell so much. Yeah, back then, he was full of praise. It's giving me goosebumps. Quote. That's weird, Quirrell's lecture was a mess. Why does Blake praise him so much? I don't understand. The long table was silent for a moment. Then, Roger suddenly chuckled. Why are you laughing? I'm laughing because you don't understand Blake's purpose. Someone asked, he praised Quirrell so much. What purpose can he have? Does he want Quirrell to give Hufflepuff extra points? Quote. Then, that's a big sacrifice. Roger laughed, of course not. Didn't you realize, after Blake started praising Quirrell, the rest of the class became interesting? Hiss, that's right. That's right. I almost fell asleep. Quote. But after Blake's praises. Quote. For the first time, Professor Quirrell has thrown away his book. He's going to practice. Yeah. But it's a pity that Professor Quirrell failed. Quote. Otherwise, we would really be able to learn something later. Oh right, didn't we learn a disarm curse? Wait. I suddenly understand what you mean. Roger. Quote. You mean, Blake praised Professor Quirrell so much because he wanted to make the boring class more interesting. For everyone to learn something real. That means he did it for sure. Hiss. That's right. If not for Blake, we wouldn't have learned the disarm spell today. Quote. I knew it. Blake must have his reasons for doing this. Quote. Really, I want to cry. Blake is too good. Quote. Then, what's with Quirrell? Blake's illumination spell is ridiculous, but it shouldn't be enough to defeat Quirrell, right? According to Madame Pomfrey's conjecture. It should be because he was in the Albanian forest. When I was tortured by that vampire and the old witch. The after effects. That's why I was hit by Blake's strong light. His illness immediately flared up. Really? Of course. At that time, I went to the school hospital to have my eyes checked. I heard Madame Pomfrey say it myself. Hiss, then did you see Professor Quirrell take off his scarf? Is that big scarf full of garlic? The scarf has indeed been taken off. There's no garlic. But I saw a big scar on the back of his head. It's as if it's been burned. Ding. Opening the gold treasure chest. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a top-grade potioneering talent. The room that would grant all requests. Blake sat alone in front of the cabin. While resting, he opened the treasure chest. Well, the potioneering talent has been opened. The rewards for the talent category should be considered complete. Blake nodded in satisfaction. At least, he had the potioneering talent. He didn't have to worry about the old bat making things difficult for him. The old bat would make things difficult for any student except for Slytherin. This was the experience of the seniors for the freshmen. Blake looked at the diamond treasure chest. He hesitated for a moment. In the end, he decided not to open it for the time being. Recently, he opened the treasure chest fiercely. His skills and talents were almost all opened. The reward of the diamond treasure chest. It seemed that he wasn't very eager for it now. So Blake decided to store up a wave of treasure chests first. The reward of the supreme treasure chest. There was only one ancient magic. He always felt that his trump card was not enough. Maybe it was time to seek another supreme treasure chest. If he wanted to directly drop the supreme treasure chest. That probability was still too low. Directly synthesizing it was the safest. But fortunately, the supreme treasure chest only needed 7 diamond treasure chests to synthesize. With his current speed of obtaining treasure chests, he believed that it wouldn't take long. He would get a supreme treasure chest. Blake thought of this. He stood up directly. Then he walked to a devil's web. The devil's web was originally very aggressive. In front of Blake. But it was very docile. Blake stretched out his palm. The green great druid's magic slowly poured into the body of the devil's web. With the input of the great druid's magic, the note of the devil's web became more and more deep. You piece of trash. No. I beg you, please spare me. Quote. Quirrell's screams echoed in his office. After returning from the school hospital, Voldemort began to torture him as expected. If it weren't for the soundproof magic in Quirrell's office, Quirrell's screams could be heard throughout Hogwarts 2.9. After a long time, the screams in the office gradually subsided. Only Quirrell's soft sobs were left. That boy. Voldemort's voice sounded at the back of Quirrell's head. At this moment, at the back of his head, Voldemort's face appeared on the scar that looked like a burn. Yes, my master, I will definitely turn Harry Potter into a. It's not Potter. It's that boy called Blake Green. Quote. Yes, master. What happened to him? Quote. Idiot. Didn't you feel his strange magic? Quote. Yes, I felt it, Quirrell said timidly. I've never seen that kind of magic. At his age, he can't learn any profound magic. So, this must be his innate talent. I'm very interested in this talent of his, Quirrell. Didn't you notice that after being hit by his strange magic, your body became better? Strange illumination spell, and strange magic that can be attached to the illumination spell. I will help Master find out. No, I want to do it myself. Quirrell's body trembled. What? You don't want to give up control of your body? No, I don't dare. Everything I have is yours, Master. When is the next Blake's Defense Against Black Magic class? Master, Ah wants to teach the class himself. I'm only interested in him. As for your other classes, you can take them yourself. Quote. Right, he seems to admire you a lot, maybe you can. The history of magic class was as rumored. Boring. Except for the professor being a ghost in the whole class. There was no highlight. Blake had already read all the history of magic books before. With his memory, he didn't need to listen to Cuthbert Binns' hypnotic lecture at all. And Cuthbert Binns' lecture was still based on the lesson plans from hundreds of years ago. Nothing new. Even questions were rare. Such a boring class that couldn't earn extra credits for their academy. All the little wizards felt drowsy. It was like being hit by a group coma spell. After half of the class, only Hermione's hairy little head was left to listen to the lecture. And she recorded some of the dates mentioned by Cuthbert Binns in her notebook. It was as if she was immune to Cuthbert Binns' hypnotic attack. As for the others, most of them had already fallen into a sweet dream. A small part of the rest. They also took a few notes at random. Their heads were dozing off bit by bit. Of course, except for those who didn't listen to the lecture. As long as they didn't listen to the lecture, they would be 100% immune to the hypnotic attack. So Blake was doing something else in the history of magic class. On his desk, there was a piece of worn parchment. It was one of the two things that he took from Filch's office that day. There were many densely packed notes on the parchment. It was just that he never knew what was on these marked points. He didn't even know about such an abstract map. Where exactly was it drawn? He couldn't find the actual location of this map. Then he couldn't know what was on the marked points on it. But, since the map was found at Hogwarts, then this map shouldn't have nothing to do with Hogwarts. Cuthbert Binns was still lecturing on the podium. He completely ignored the fact that a large number of people had fallen down. And after Blake looked at the map for a while, he finally saw some clues. Because in a small corner of this map, there was an irregular curve. According to Blake's understanding, 30. This might be the outline of a corner of a lake. It can't be the Black Lake, right? Blake had only been in school for 2 days. Actually, he had never been to the Black Lake before. Therefore, he did not know the shape of the Black Lake for the time being. But, if this was Black Lake, then the large area to the side. Wouldn't that be the Forbidden Forest? These marked points are all in the Forbidden Forest. Blake prepared to leave after class. Let's go and see if that silhouette is Black Lake. But, Cuthbert Binns' history of magic class. It was still going on. Cuthbert Binns was a ghost. However, he was too old. He couldn't even communicate with the little wizards. Hermione tried to raise his hand a few times. But Cuthbert Binns couldn't even remember her name. Then Hermione gave up. He concentrated on taking notes. Blake saw this scene. He also gave up on the idea of gaining Cuthbert Binns' favor. Then, he took out his notebook from his pocket. And a book on alchemy by Dumbledore. He began to study alchemy. He already had advanced alchemy talent. There was also elementary alchemy proficiency. With the help of his academic genius talent and super memory talent. Therefore, his alchemy experience grew very quickly. As he continued to flip through the books and take notes. On the system panel, the elementary alchemy experience bar was rising rapidly. Basically, there were not many bottlenecks. After the speed slowed down, he changed to an alchemy book. His learning speed was very fast. After he finished flipping through all the alchemy books he carried with him, Blake had to temporarily give up on the study of alchemy. He took out a book on potion studies. Given his understanding of herbology, There was also the blessing of the best potion studies talent. Therefore, his potion studies. His learning speed was even faster than alchemy. Wayne and Roger, who were next to him, were originally asleep. But they were woken up by the sound of flipping books next to them. Wayne subconsciously touched the pocket of his school uniform. Then he began to rub his eyes. I must not be awake. Otherwise, why would I think that a pocket can hold so many books? When the long and boring history of magic class finally ended. Because he flipped through the books too quickly. In the end, there were no books to turn to. Blake had no choice but to join the sleeping army. Feeling refreshed, he stood up. First, he had to confirm if the silhouette on the map was Black Lake. Secondly, he had to ask Dumbledore for more books. Because he had already flipped through these books. They were no longer useful to him. Blake put all the books back into the pocket of the school uniform transformed by the cloak. Then he quickly walked out of the classroom. Hermione wanted to stop him. But he walked too fast. He disappeared around the corner of the corridor. He disappeared from everyone's sight. Hey, Blake, the greenhouse of the herbal medicine class is not that way. Quote. Hermione chased after him. But after turning a corner, she found that there was no one in the long corridor. They left too quickly. Hermione said in surprise. But she didn't notice. Outside the window, a hawk was flying in the direction of the Forbidden Forest. He wanted to know if a map was accurate or not. The best way, of course, was to find the place. Then he looked down. Blake wanted to compare the shape of the Black Lake. So he directly used the ability of the Great Druid. He turned into a hawk. He flew to the sky above the junction of the Forbidden Forest and the Black Lake. Soon, Blake found the outline that basically matched the map. It was indeed the Black Lake. In other words, those marked places. They were in the Forbidden Forest. So, what were these places? Blake's curiosity was completely aroused. It's time to go to the Forbidden Forest. As for whether there was danger in the Forbidden Forest. Sorry. Blake had the Great Druid template. He went to the forest. It was just like going home. When Hermione arrived at the greenhouse of the herbal medicine class, she found that Blake had already arrived. He was talking and laughing with Professor Sprout. You went in the opposite direction, how did you get here earlier than us? Hermione was puzzled. It's very simple, because I flew here. Blake told the truth. Of course, sometimes the truth was so hard to believe. Hermione rolled her eyes at him. In the next herbal medicine class, Blake was still competing for points with Hermione. Of course, except for Blake. The little badgers were encouraged. They also raised their hands to answer the questions. That was it. Hermione, who was 1 against 100, was defeated in the end. After the whole class, she only earned 5 points for Gryffindor. Professor Sprout was a little embarrassed. So he deliberately added points for her. Professor Dumbledore. It's true. Quote. Such a big box of things. It's suddenly gone. When Blake came to the principal's office, he happened to see Mr. Filch reporting the strange thing to Professor Dumbledore. After Mrs. Dolores saw Blake, she cried out excitedly. Dumbledore asked Blake to wait a moment. Then he said to Filch, I'll look into this matter. You can go back first. Don't worry. Filch picked up Mrs. Dolores. After glancing at Blake, he left the principal's office. What's going on? Blake asked with a guilty conscience. Someone broke into his office. Then they quietly put him in the office. All the dangerous items collected over the years were stolen. Mr. Filch suspects that the Weasley twins did it. But I don't think it's a simple matter. Even the smart Weasley brothers can't do this. Blake nodded. He didn't leave any traces. So he wasn't worried about being found out. What business do you have with me? Here's the thing. Blake took out the books one by one from his pocket. I've finished reading all these books. So, I want to ask you for a few more. Quote. Dumbledore looked at the high pile of books in shock. Blake, it's only been 2 days since school started, you've finished reading all these books. Kid, you should be honest. Obviously, Dumbledore didn't believe that Blake had finished reading all these books. However, this was normal. After all, he had these books for less than 2 days. Moreover, he had read so many books. If it were someone else, not to mention reading all of them in such a short time, it would be difficult to go through all of them. But, I'm telling the truth, Professor. My memory has been good since I was young. So after reading it once, I remembered it all. Dumbledore looked at Blake in surprise. Did this kid really have a photographic memory? Dumbledore looked at Blake in disbelief. Professor, if you don't believe me, you can ask me. Dumbledore calmed himself down. Okay. Then I'll test you. Quote. Of course, he hoped that Blake wasn't lying. If that was the case, it would prove that this kid's talent was ridiculously high. This was great news. Dumbledore excitedly pulled out a random book from the pile. It was a book on potionology. Then, Dumbledore flipped to a random page. What's the formula for the invigorating potion? Blake suddenly felt like he was in his current state. It was very similar to his teacher in his previous life. However, he was much more confident than before. At the very least, he memorized it. Hawklap juice 50 drops, comma. White fresh leaf 3. The more Dumbledore listened, the more shocked he was. Because not only did Blake memorize the content, but he also memorized it. Even the punctuation was correct. Dumbledore looked at Blake with a face full of surprise. He didn't know that Blake had a photographic memory until now. Blake happily accepted a golden treasure chest from Dumbledore. Then, Dumbledore randomly checked the contents of a few books. Then, he realized that Blake was telling the truth. Blake, Dumbledore put down the book. I'm very happy that you have such a strong talent. But, I hope that you won't be arrogant. Oh, I can give you the new books. But, I still hope that you can digest the knowledge that you've memorized. Because this knowledge, other than potionology, it's not enough to just memorize the alchemy knowledge. You have to digest it well. Dumbledore's words actually made sense. It was just like a mathematical formula. Even if you memorized it, you wouldn't be able to solve it. You had to know how to use it flexibly. Only when you truly understood the principles behind it. The knowledge that was memorized in the brain was alive. It wasn't dead. Therefore, Dumbledore hoped that Blake would go back and digest the knowledge that he had memorized. Then, he would come in contact with new knowledge. Professor, I understand. That's why I came to you for the new books after I've fully grasped the knowledge. 517 inches. Dumbledore didn't know that Blake was also talented in potioneering and alchemy. Coupled with his top student talent. He had only read through this knowledge once. Then, he would have complete mastery over it. He didn't need to digest it slowly like the others. Dumbledore looked at Blake in surprise. Are you serious? Because of the experience just now. Therefore, Dumbledore didn't dare to question Blake's words. You can still test me. Blake smiled confidently. A moment later, Dumbledore looked at Blake in shock. You're really? Dumbledore looked at the tall pile of books in front of him. He was incomparably shocked. The gift of photographic memory. Although it was rare. But in this kind of superb memory. He was taking some magic potions. Or after casting some kind of spell on himself. Even ordinary adepts could possess it for a short period of time. But, to be able to memorize and master it with just a glance. This wasn't something an ordinary person could do. What a terrifying talent. Ding. Extremely shocked emotions detected. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a diamond treasure chest. Quote. Blake looked at the new diamond treasure chest in the system space with joy. He was one step closer to the supreme treasure chest. Dumbledore looked at Blake helplessly. With your learning speed. I'm afraid I won't have any new books for you soon. Quote. But, I happen to know an old friend. He has a lot of precious books at home. I think it's for my sake. He'll be willing to lend me his collection for a while. Blake's face was filled with joy. He seemed to know who Dumbledore's old friend was. Nico Lamore. A legendary alchemist who had lived for hundreds of years. In terms of the number of books. Who could compare to him? There were enough books. Then Blake's subject proficiency experience bar. He could continue to improve. Soon after. Blake had dozens of Dumbledore's books in his pocket. He walked out of Dumbledore's office. However, in the eyes of others, these books would take a year to read. It wasn't enough for him to flip through for one night. And Dumbledore wanted to say hello to Nico Lamore. He would have to wait for a few days. Blake didn't want to wait for a few days. After returning to the dormitory, Blake took out a notebook. He wrote a sentence on it. I want to read. But I've finished reading Professor Dumbledore's collection. A few seconds later, there was an answer from the notebook. What kind of collection can he have? He wrote all of them himself. Send your owl over. I'll show you the Grindelwald family's collection. In the room of all requests, Blake was holding a small pair of scissors and trimming a poisonous tentacle plant. As he put the cut leaves into a bag. Because poisonous tentacle leaves, 10 gold coins per leaf. That's how ridiculous it is. So, logically speaking. Except for Hagrid. Professor Sprout was also a hidden rich man in Hogwarts. Because Hogwarts was considered rare. A legal institution that could grow such dangerous forbidden plants. Due to the danger of poisonous tentacles, ordinary wizards stayed away from this plant. In addition, there was a ban on ordinary wizards growing it. Therefore, the rarer something was, the more valuable it was. Only a great druid like Blake dared to approach this plant without any precautions. When others approached these plants, they had to wear protective clothing. Being bitten by a poisonous tentacle was no joke. Even Professor McGonagall's husband, he also died in the hands of this plant. Just because he was bitten by a poisonous tentacle. Suddenly, the door of the room of all requests was opened. Cassandra walked in. She was holding a box in her hand. When she saw the row of poisonous tentacles in front of Blake, she was completely shocked. What did you do? I remember that we just planted the seeds. Why now? They just planted the seeds in the soil yesterday. Clang. Logically speaking, the fastest progress was just germination. But now, this was not even germination. This was already considered ripening. Blake put down the small scissors. Satisfied, he accepted a golden treasure chest that exploded out of shock. I just added a little fertilizer to them. Fertilizer. What kind of fertilizer can speed up the growth cycle of these plants by 100 times? Quote. Can I keep it a secret for the time being? Cassandra. Blake shrugged. Cassandra put down the box. She crossed her arms in front of her chest. Obviously, she really wanted to know now. This is a little secret of mine. I'll tell you later. Blake's Archdruid template. Other than being able to strengthen animals, it could also nurture and strengthen plants. This stuff works better than any fertilizer. And there were no side effects. Therefore, this was not a case of rushing a seedling to help it grow. Okay. Cassandra did not press Blake. Although she was dying of curiosity. Make friends with Blake. Cassandra understood at least a little. That's when Blake doesn't want to tell you. Even if you used a crowbar, you wouldn't be able to pry open his mouth. Cassandra took the box from the floor. He placed it in front of Blake. This was brought back by your owl. It didn't find you. That's why I brought it to you. Merlin, why is your owl so big? You gave me a huge fright back then. Quote. And, how did you train it? It actually knows to look for me when it can't find you. Blake put down the tool in his hand. He ran over happily. If he guessed correctly, Grindelwald was here to deliver the books. Looking at this small suitcase, he thought to himself. Blake didn't feel disappointed. Grindelwald said that he would show him the Grindelwald family's book collection. Naturally, it was impossible for him to only send him a few books. What's in here? Cassandra asked. She actually suspected that Blake had gone to buy the seeds of some dangerous plants again. It should be some books. Blake took the suitcase from her. Then he placed it on the ground. He looked at the lock on the suitcase. He understood and pressed his finger on the lock. Blake only felt something gently sweep his finger. Then the suitcase's lock clicked open. Blake didn't avoid Cassandra. He directly opened the lid of the suitcase. As the suitcase opened, the whole suitcase also changed. Click, click, quote. 2 crisp sounds rang out. It was originally a very small suitcase. It actually became 3 times bigger. When Cassandra heard that it was just some books, she instinctively thought that it was just a few books. After all, it was only such a small suitcase. It couldn't hold many books. When Blake opened the lid of the suitcase, Cassandra didn't think so anymore. In the suitcase, it wasn't as she had imagined. It was just a few books piled up. 2. At the entrance of the enlarged suitcase. Along the winding staircase. It spread all the way from the mouth of the suitcase to the bottom. The suitcase was placed on the ground. It didn't look like a suitcase. It was more like the entrance to a basement. Obviously. This was a box that had been cast with an extremely profound traceless stretching spell. Blake pulled out his big wand. Flickering fluorescent light. Cassandra subconsciously covered her eyes with her hand. What are you doing? Blake asked curiously. Well, I heard that your illumination spell is very special. It can blind people's eyes. Blake was speechless for a while. Would you believe me if I said that I did it on purpose? How could I not control the power of the illumination spell? Forget it. Blake was too lazy to explain. How could my Gandalf magic tablet be such an inconvenience? Blake held up his wand. He took the lead. He stepped on the escalator in the box. Blake's whole body was sucked in. Suddenly, his voice came from inside. Do you want to come in and take a look? Cassandra's face relaxed and showed a smile. She immediately stepped on the escalator as well. You're the one who let me come in. The winding escalator. Compared to Newt's box, the straight-up ladder was much more comfortable. There was such a staircase. It also meant that the space inside was definitely huge. Sure enough. When Blake went down to the bottom floor, the lights in the box automatically turned on. The whole box was brightly lit. Blake extinguished the illumination spell on his wand. He looked at the rows of bookshelves around him in shock. It was not that he didn't expect it. Grindelwald would use the traceless stretch spell to send him a lot of books. He just didn't expect Grindelwald to send him a mobile library. Look. This was what it meant to be domineering. Behind him. Cassandra was already stunned by the bookshelves in front of her. Are these the some books you just said? Quote. Do you have some kind of misunderstanding about some? Are these some books? This can be called a small library. Blake silently received a silver treasure chest from Cassandra. In the middle of many bookshelves. There was a desk and a comfortable armchair. There was a note on the desk. There was only one sentence on the note. This is a small part of our family's library. There's more after you finish reading it. Note. Not a single Dumbledore book. GG. And this was only a small portion. Blake was amazed. These books are enough for me to read for a month. Hearing this, Cassandra rolled her big emerald eyes at Blake. There were so many books for her to read. He could watch the graduation ceremony. Blake actually said that it would only last for a month. Do you want to take a look at what you're saying? Was that something a human would say? Blake began to browse through the books on each bookshelf. He found that they were all placed in different categories. For example, the 5 or 6 bookshelves on the left. There were all kinds of magic spell books. There were several bookshelves on the right. It was a book on potioneering. It seemed like a lot of thought had been put into this. Blake walked around in a big circle. Then he was satisfied to find out. There were several shelves of books for each subject. It was very comprehensive. There were so many books. Blake estimated. He could divide his subjects into different subjects. They were all upgraded to intermediate proficiency, or even close to advanced proficiency. However, he thought of the large collection of books at Nico LeMay's place. Blake was very excited. With these books. Naturally, he didn't need to go to the forbidden book area. So, where in the world did you get so many books? Cassandra asked. Blake was not surprised. No matter who it was. After seeing such a ridiculous thing, they would be puzzled. A very special friend. He won't let me tell others his name. By the way, please keep it a secret for me. Cassandra listened to Blake's answer. She nodded. Everyone had some secrets. But Blake was willing to share some of his secrets with her. This sense of trust made her feel inexplicably happy. Not long after, Blake and Cassandra walked out of the box. Of course, Blake was not stingy. He generously borrowed several spell books for Cassandra. But Cassandra was different from Blake. These thick and esoteric spell books. One book was enough for her to study for a long time. Try not to let anyone see these books. Blake gave her a heads up. The Grindelwald family might have a collection of books. But back then, his power swept all over Europe. God knew which of these books were the Grindelwald family's collection. Which ones were snatched by Grindelwald. Grindelwald was very good to him. But this couldn't hide the fact. That was, he was indeed a bad guy back then. Blake didn't take the book box with him. Instead, he left it in the small wooden house in the room of requests. Because it was in the room of requests. It was safer and more confidential than in the dormitory. He just had to put on the hovering cloak. He could quietly come to the room of requests at night to read. Moreover, he didn't want Dumbledore to know that he had been in contact with Grindelwald. After all, this name was very sensitive to Dumbledore. In Dumbledore's opinion, against fire, theft, and Grindelwald. Even talking to Grindelwald made him worried that Blake would be led astray. Not to mention directly reading the book he sent over. After dinner, Blake received a note. Judging from the words written in circles, it seemed that it was Dumbledore's handwriting. The note told him to find Hagrid after dinner. Blake immediately perked up. Dumbledore did keep his promise. He packed a bear and sent it to Hogwarts. However, in front of Hagrid, this kind of ordinary brown bear. At most, it was a larger Siberian hamster. So Dumbledore was still very relieved. When Blake arrived at Hagrid's hut, from afar, he saw a big bear sitting obediently outside Hagrid's hut. And Hagrid was feeding it with a bucket of salmon. Sigh, what a pitiful little cutie. Quote, look, how thin have you become? Hagrid muttered as she fed it. Good evening, Hagrid. Ah, Blake. Hagrid turned around and saw Blake. A sincere smile appeared on her bearded face. Your little pet just arrived this afternoon. But, I want to say, you should have sent it over earlier. The guy who helped you take care of it is really not very professional. Look, it's so thin. Quote. Blake looked at Big Bear, who weighed 400 to 500 pounds. He didn't quite agree with Hagrid's words. In fact, as an ordinary brown bear, Big Bear was already overnourished. The nutrients that were missing, they had long been made up for. But, this little size, in front of Hagrid. She was indeed skinny. Big Bear saw Blake. An ugly smile appeared on silly girl's face. Hagrid smiled and said, looks like your relationship is pretty good. Don't worry, Blake. I'll prepare a nest for it in the Forbidden Forest. I'll take care of it for you. It'll definitely be better than anyone else. Hagrid, thank you. Blake thanked him with a smile. Hagrid grinned as well. He liked Blake's character. Because Blake was just like him. He also likes animals very much. The fiercer it was, the more he liked it. Blake had told him before. His dream since he was young was to raise a dragon. This was simply too much to his liking. What did it mean to be like-minded? Look at Blake's owl. That was the largest and most difficult to tame Joe Owl. That mighty look. Even Hagrid couldn't help but want to buy one. After Blake and Hagrid have a nice cup of tea, Hagrid and Blake leave. Then, they would attack together. At the edge of the Forbidden Forest near Hagrid's hut, he made a nest for Big Bear. While Hagrid wasn't paying attention, Blake used Big Druid's magic to test the situation inside Big Bear's body. He was relieved to find that the magic in its body was still there. This proved that Big Bear wouldn't stop the Druid's magic strengthening because of him. It would degenerate into an ordinary bear again. It seemed that the experiment was indeed very promising to succeed. After drinking tea with Hagrid for a while, after exchanging experiences with magical animals, Blake said goodbye to Hagrid and left. However, Blake didn't go back to the dormitory. He didn't go back to the room of everything to read. He took out a map and looked at it. The marked points on the map. It had already aroused his curiosity. If he didn't find out what those marked points were, he wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. Blake put away the map. The marked points on the map had long been firmly memorized in his mind. He and the Weasley twins tried every means to enter the Forbidden Forest. But almost every time they were kicked out by Hagrid, it was different. Blake didn't need to worry about this at all. Because he didn't need to go in at all. In a deserted corridor of the castle. After Blake found that there was no one around and there were no portraits, he turned on the invisibility function of the floating cloak. Then he used Big Druid's skills. He transformed himself into an owl that could see things at night. Blake was pleasantly surprised to find that, even if he transformed into an owl, the invisibility function of the floating cloak still existed. Blake then flew out of the corridor window with relief. Standing. The cool night breeze made Blake, who was flying in the air, feel refreshed. The castle was still lit. It was getting farther and farther behind him. Blake found the right direction. He flew towards the closest marked point to the castle. I hope the things there won't let me down. The Forbidden Forest under the night sky. It appeared to be a dark mass. Everywhere was filled with a gloomy aura. However, in Blake's eyes, it was very clear. He used the Archdruid's skill to transform into an owl. He also had the night vision of an owl. It had to be said that he had this ability. The extremely dangerous Forbidden Forest. It was indeed like his own home to him now. His flying speed was extremely fast. Moreover, he was flying in the sky. In addition, he was invisible. Blake would not encounter any danger at all. Therefore, he soon arrived near the first marked point. Blake circled in the sky twice. In the Forbidden Forest. The forest was dense. In the sky. It was difficult to see the situation in the forest clearly. It seemed that he had no choice but to go down. Blake circled in the sky for a long time. Then, he began to descend. When Blake landed on the branch of a big tree, his body suddenly transformed into a snake. In the state of a snake's body. After detecting that there were no other dangers on this tree, he snaked down from the top of the tree. When he reached the ground, he immediately turned into an agile leopard cat. Blake did not worry much about safety. With the invisibility effect of the floating cloak, basically, no creature could discover him. Even if a dark creature discovered him and launched an attack, that might not be able to break through the defense of the floating cloak. With these measures, Blake's trip to the Forbidden Forest. It could not even be called an adventure. The place where Blake landed was still a little distance away from the marked point. The reason why he did not want to land at the marked point. It was to observe more things. If there was really any danger, he could also discover it in advance from the periphery. Instead of foolishly going straight into the encirclement, Blake transformed into a leopard cat. He walked through the forest casually. His speed was not slower than flying in the sky at all. The location of the marked point was getting closer and closer. Suddenly, Blake stopped in his tracks. That was because he had discovered traces of fluorescence in front of him. At the place where the fluorescent light flashed. Behind a tree. In such a dark forest. There was no light source at all. All of them represented abnormalities. Blake was invisible. He slowly walked in that direction. The body of a leopard cat. It landed without a sound. Behind the big tree. Blake finally saw the source of the fluorescent light. It was actually a unicorn. Its beautiful white fur. The reflection 743 reflected the faint moonlight. They became the fluorescent lights just now. Blake let out a sigh of relief. There was indeed a unicorn tribe in the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid could always get a lot of hair from these kind and beautiful creatures. Then made into a cushion. It was such a waste of resources. After admiring the unicorn for a while, Blake nodded his head. Then, he walked forward again. The marking point was just ahead. Blake couldn't help but quicken his steps. Immediately after, Blake discovered even more fluorescent lights. He stood at the marked spot. Then he realized that it was a place where unicorns lived. Dozens of unicorns that were rarely seen. They were resting here. In the middle, there were even young unicorns with golden hair. Blake, in his leopard cat form, squatted on a branch. He pondered for a while. Could it be that these marked spots? The marked spots are actually the habitats of the magical animals in the Forbidden Forest. But this doesn't make sense. Although magical animals do have habitats. But magical animals can also migrate. When this map was marked at the beginning, didn't the map maker consider this problem? If the magical animals migrated, then this map would be meaningless. Then what's the point of him working so hard to remember the habitats of these magical animals? Blake pondered for a while. He decided to go to the next marked spot. It was useless to just think about it. He would know if his guess was right when he saw it on the spot. Or maybe, this map didn't mark the habitat of magical animals at all. Blake's curiosity was completely piqued. He didn't feel tired at all. Then, he climbed to the top of the tree silently. Then, he transformed into an owl again. He flew toward the nearest marked spot. His flying speed was very fast. Blake soon arrived at the marked spot. This time, Blake didn't slowly sneak in from the periphery. Because the trees here were very sparse. He could see the marked spots clearly in the sky. Nothing. Blake looked at the empty forest. Could it be that I guessed wrong? This marked spot is actually not the habitat of magical animals. The unicorn from before was just a coincidence. Just as Blake was hovering in the sky, he suddenly heard a series of hissing sounds coming from the forest. But there was clearly nothing at all. All of a sudden, Blake remembered that there was something inside. Night G. Only those who have seen real death can see what a night G looks like. Blake had indeed never seen death. In order to confirm the thoughts in his heart, Blake deliberately skimmed over the forest at a low altitude. Then, he saw hoofprints automatically appearing in the forest. After confirming the thoughts in his heart, Blake didn't stop. He flew to another marked spot again. Just like that, Blake kept investigating the marked spots on the map. Then, he saw a lot of magical animals. Winged beasts with hippogriff. Moon beasts. Ball birds. Jobber birds. He was even in a corner in the deepest part of the forbidden forest. He saw a group of bird snakes. Finally, Blake confirmed the thoughts in his heart. On this map, every marked spot, it recorded the habitat of a magical animal. And the most important thing was, he even found the habitat of the eight-eyed giant spider on it. Blake saw the cave where Aragog lived from afar in the sky. This explained one thing. That was, the year this map appeared might be in recent decades. After all, Aragog was 50 years ago, when Hagrid was framed by Tom. Put in the Forbidden Forest. Before that, there was no habitat of the eight-eyed giant spider in the Forbidden Forest. However, Blake didn't jump to conclusions easily. Because he remembered the map of the Living Point. When the four-man team of Marauders created the map of the Living Point. But he didn't know the name of the little wizard in the school now. But as long as someone appeared on the map, this person's name would appear on the map. So, he planned to go back. Check this map carefully again. If it really had a function similar to the map of the Living Point, then it would be a perfect explanation. Why was the map maker not afraid of the migration of these magical animals? Because even if they migrated, the marked points on the map would also be updated randomly. Even after there was an additional magical animal, new marked points would be added to the map. After getting a general idea of what these marked points represented, Zhongzhan decided to take a closer look. Blake set off on his return journey. Blake, who had been invisible, flew directly back to the castle. Then he turned into a leopard cat without footsteps in the corridor. Then he ran to the door of the Hufflepuff common room. After observing that there was no one around, he returned to his human form. Then he removed his invisibility state. Finally, he opened the door of the common room with a calm face. At this time, it was just about 12:00 in the evening. There were also many small badgers in the common room. They saw Blake, who came back at this time. They didn't find it strange. After all, the school's kitchen was just opposite the Hufflepuff common room. There were often small badgers who went to the kitchen to eat and drink at this time. This was something that was tacitly understood. So what was strange about him coming back at this time? A few of the seniors even stood up at this moment. They were going to the kitchen to get something to eat. Then they would come back and continue to roll. Blake returned to his dormitory without anyone noticing. At this time, in the dormitory, Blake's two roommates were still up in the middle of the night. They were still playing with Dabao. These two guys and Dabao got to know each other after a fight. Dabao was under Blake's strict order. It didn't dare to be a demon. Therefore, it became friends with Wayne and the others. Roger even built a very comfortable nest for it. Blake didn't disturb the guys who were playing. He sat on his bed. He took out the map. Now Blake's alchemy and magic spells had reached a certain level. So after he checked the map again, sure enough, he found something strange about this map. A smile appeared on Blake's face. He took out his magic wand. In the upper left corner of the map, he tapped it lightly 3 times. The situation of the whole map changed dramatically. The things on the map became more detailed in an instant. It was like, from a simple drawing. Gradually, there were details. Gradually, there were colors. And the originally fixed marked points. Now they had become the outline of magical animals. What's more, these outlines were not static. Some of them were moving slightly. In other words, the positions of these magical animals were locked. Even if they migrated, the map could also show their positions. It's amazing. This map for Blake. It was simply too useful. The Forbidden Forest was very big. Before, he wanted to find a specific magical animal. Then he had to find it bit by bit. But now, with this map. What magical animal material did he want? He could go directly to their habitat. And then he could get it. Magical animal materials were important to Blake. It was still very useful. He could upgrade his cloak. He could also make his own alchemy items. He could even use the system's synthesis function to create equipment according to the blueprint. At this time, Wayne and Roger, who were tired of fighting over there. He walked over with Sniff in his arms. Blake tapped his wand on the map. The map immediately turned back into a simple drawing. How is it? Is Dabao being naughty today? Quote. No. Dabao is very obedient today. Quote. We've become good friends, right? Squeak squeak squeak. I'm helping you maintain your friendship. You actually asked me if I'm naughty. You're not at home all day long. How can you maintain it? Without me, this family will fall apart. Quote. Blake took Dabao. He patted its head. Then he stuffed a gold coin into its little paw. Squeak squeak squeak. Dabao hugged the gold coin and took a bite. Well, it was not a transformation spell. Then it began to happily stuff the gold coin into its pocket. Good fellow, it's getting harder and harder to fool you now. Everything was normal for the next few days. Blake did not attend classes during the day. He stayed in the room that would grant all his requests. Other than taking care of the magical plants. He read books in the book box. Of course, there was the matter of the map. He did not let it go. Blake was already planning. Why did he go to the Forbidden Forest to fool a few magical animals? Of course. There was one more thing that Blake had put on the agenda. That was the map of the Resurrection Point. Now, the map of the Resurrection Point was in the hands of the Weasley twins. Blake did not want to get the map from them. Because Blake planned to make a new map of the Resurrection Point himself. Since the Marauder Quartet could do it, there was no reason why he couldn't do it. Everything should have been normal. But except for one person. That was Quirrell. He did not know what was going on with this guy. During class, he changed from his half-dead state. He actually started to teach students things. But, from other people's stories, Blake felt it very keenly. Although Quirrell's teaching method had changed. During their defense against the dark arts class. That Quirrell was different from the Quirrell when he was in other people's defense against the dark arts class. It was completely different. In other words, it was to teach others. It was the real Quirrell. It was to teach Blake. It was Voldemort himself. Blake knew. This was what Tom wanted to do. And his target seemed to be him. But, the strange thing was, he did not sense any malice from him. This was ridiculous. One had to know that last time, Voldemort wanted to burn him with fire. But now, not only did this not hurt him. Why was he dutifully teaching him defense against the dark arts? Blake really did not understand what this guy was planning. So, he could only go to Dumbledore. After all, Dumbledore knew that there was something wrong with Quirrell. And Dumbledore also knew that Blake knew about this matter. Dumbledore's office. When Dumbledore heard Blake talk about the recent strange changes in Quirrell, he also frowned. I heard about this too. Quirrell's teaching style has changed drastically. But, are you sure that Quirrell didn't really swallow? Blake spread his hands. I sensed an aura from Quirrell. It was like facing you. I don't know how good Quirrell was before. But I don't think he could be as strong as you. Dumbledore nodded. He trusted Blake's intuition. In other words, he already has his eyes on you, Blake. Maybe it was your illumination spell last time that made Tom see something. Then what should I do? Blake asked. Just do as usual, Blake. I've already asked someone trustworthy to keep an eye on him. Professor Snape. How did you know? Dumbledore looked at Blake in surprise. He was staring at Quirrell's scarf when he was eating. Blake said helplessly. Dumbledore was speechless. In the evening. At the edge of the Forbidden Forest. In the cave where Big Bear lived. Blake stretched out his right hand. He pressed it on Big Bear's back. The green druid magic was slowly instilled into its body. It was constantly strengthening its body. Big Bear lay on the ground obediently. It enjoyed Blake's druid massage. After a while, Blake took his hand away. Today's strengthening experiment was over. Because it was the same as before. He felt the upper limit of the magic input. Big Bear couldn't accept any more. Big Bear sat up. It seemed very excited. It cried to Blake, "Whoa, whoa, whoa." It was talking to Blake. The general idea was, my waist is no longer sore, My legs are no longer painful, and I'm not even panting when I'm eating a big bucket of salmon. In conclusion, Blake's massage was very satisfying. Blake touched Big Bear's head. He carefully felt the increasingly powerful magic in Big Bear's body. Then he asked, "Do you feel anything other than physical comfort?" "Whoa, whoa, whoa, I'm much stronger now, and my body is much lighter than before." Blake nodded. Although he could talk to animals. But these animals had high and low IQs. Sometimes he couldn't speak to them. He knew exactly what state they were in at that time. At least, he didn't know that after his strengthening. What specific changes had happened to Big Bear just now? What specific aspects of its body had been improved? Ah, if only there was a property panel that could be seen at a glance. Blake thought to himself. Suddenly, Blake paused. No way, maybe there's a keyword here. In view of the system's lesson. So, Blake said slowly and softly in anticipation. System, pet property panel. Ding. Triggered the pet panel keyword. Quote. Ding. Opening the pet panel. Quote. A new virtual light screen appeared in front of Blake. Blake was pleasantly surprised. There were only a few simple lines of words on the interface. Tamed pet. Brown bear, Big Bear. Sniff sniff, Dabow. Eagle owl, unnamed. Eight-eyed giant spider, unnamed. Unhatched egg. One random magical animal egg. There doesn't seem to be any extra information. However, because of his previous experience. So Blake skillfully extended his finger. On the virtual screen, he gently tapped on the word, Brown bear, Big Bear. True enough. The virtual screen flickered. Then, he jumped to a detailed panel. Brown bear, Big Bow. Available points, 90. Stamina, 20 plus. Power, 25 plus. Speed, 30 plus. Endurance, 10 plus. Attack, 21 plus. Physical defense, 20 plus. Magic defense, 2 plus. Existing skills, slap, brutal charge, fatal bite. Awakened special skill. Inactive can be activated after evolution. Evolution mana required for next evolution, 1800-2000. Blake happily looked at the detailed attribute panel. This way, it would be much clearer. Blake looked from top to bottom. He began to look at the attribute panel. His gaze fell on the unassigned 90 points. And the plus sign behind the attribute panel paused for a moment. No wonder it took so long to strengthen. You just feel that your body has become healthy. But there is no other obvious improvement. It turns out that I haven't added a point to you yet. Blake quickly figured out a lot of things. He decided to strengthen Big Bear with Druid's magic until now. Minus the days without strengthening in the middle. It was exactly 30 days. Now it was 90 points of attribute points. In other words, every time he strengthened Big Bear, it could increase its attribute points by 3 points. And that evolution required magic power. According to the panel. The result of the calculation of the 1800 points of magic power. Then every time he strengthened it, it would increase its magic power by 60 points. And the magic power required for evolution was 2000 points. In other words, Blake only needed to strengthen Big Bear for another 4 days. It could really achieve evolution. Officially from an ordinary brown bear into a magical animal. At that time, Big Bear's special skill panel should be officially activated. Then it would definitely comprehend the special skills that belong to magical animals. Moreover, after evolving into a magical animal, Big Bear may still be strengthened. And then evolve again. However, this would take 4 days. After Big Bear had completely evolved. Only then could he check whether Big Bear had the possibility of evolving again from the attribute panel. Finally, according to Blake's inference, this pet panel. It should be a matching function that belonged to the Druid panel. After all, Blake tamed animals by relying on the Druid panel. And in this world, there was no Druid. Blake came back to his senses. Then he began to think about how to add points to Big Bear. As a bear, Big Bear. Strength and physical strength were naturally its strengths. But to Blake's surprise, Big Bear's initial speed was actually 30 points. No wonder people said that bears ran very fast. People couldn't run away at all. 20 points of physical defense was also in line with the characteristics of bears with rough skin and thick flesh. But magic defense. Maybe Big Bear was not a magical animal. So its magic defense was only 2 points. This was not good. In the magic world, how could its magic defense be so low? Blake pondered for a moment. Then he began to allocate the 90 skill points. First of all, as a bear, it had an extremely strong physical quality. Its attack power was also very good. After all, not many creatures could withstand a slap from a bear. At this stage, Blake felt that his current enemies should only be wizards for the time being. Then, strength and physical strength. These attributes could not be touched for the time being. However, the defense power must be increased. Especially the magic defense. And the endurance must also be increased. Endurance should have affected its battle endurance. So, Blake decided to allocate points to Big Bear like this. 10 points of endurance increased Big Bear's combat endurance. The remaining 80 points were all added to the magic defense. If the enemy was a wizard, the attack method must be a curse. Then the magic defense was very important. And the wizards, in addition to magic, they were just ordinary humans. As a bear, its initial attributes were already enough to crush humans. So it could not be added for the time being. But, if the enemy used the necromancer curse, Blake's smile gradually faded. It was certain that the black wizard would use the death curse. This was also something that could not be helped. Unless he equipped the pet with equipment that could resist the death curse. Otherwise. But now, for the time being, in addition to adding magic defense to the pet, there was nothing else he could do for the time being. He only hoped that the magic defense had reached a certain level. Could it be immune to the death curse? This possibility was not high. But, this was an experiment. It was only halfway through. God knows after the evolution. Would the initial attributes increase again? Blake also silently recorded the matter of making pet equipment. Now he was studying alchemy. If he could get in touch with Nico LeMay through Dumbledore, then his alchemy would inevitably be greatly improved. At that time, even if the system treasure chest could not open a good pet equipment blueprint, he could also rely on himself to make it with alchemy. He had just entered the school. There was still time. As long as he could get more treasure chests, he believed that there would be more in the future. After thinking about it, Blake began to add points to Shangda. With 10 points of endurance and 80 points of magic defense added. On the attribute panel, the plus sign after the specific attributes disappeared. At the same time, Blake noticed, as the addition of points ended, a strange luster flashed on Shangda's brown fur. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I feel a lot more energetic. Quote. Blake smiled. With an increase in endurance, he would naturally feel energetic. Blake looked at the attribute panel again. Brown bear da bao. Assignable points, 0. Stamina, 20. Strength, 25. Speed, 30. Endurance, 20. Stamina, 21. Physical defense, 20. Magic defense, 82. Existing skills, slap, brutal charge, fatal bite. Awakened special skills, inactive can be activated after evolution. Evolution magic power required for the next level of evolution, 1800-2000. Reset attribute points can be reset by spending evolution magic power. Blake soon found that there was an extra sentence at the end. Attribute points could be reset. Blake tentatively clicked on the virtual option to reset attribute points. Then, a window popped up on the system panel. Confirm to spend 30 points of evolution magic power to reset attribute points. Yes, no. Blake was ecstatic. Attribute points could be reset. Then he didn't have to worry about adding the wrong points. And it could be reset repeatedly in the future. Then he could experiment with the specific effects of various attribute points. Blake stretched out his finger. He clicked on no. He would add points like this for the time being. After Shangda evolved, he would look at the situation again. Then, Blake took out several barrels of Big Bear's favorite salmon. Then, he took out 2 large jars of honey. Big Bear was Blake's first experimental pet. Blake felt that he owed it a lot. Eat, Big Bear. It's dangerous for you to help me with the experiment. Do you regret it? Whoa, whoa, whoa. Big Bear licked the honey and said naively. Blake was touched. Whoa, whoa, whoa. If possible, help me find a female Shang-Er. Blake suddenly felt less touched. After leaving Big Bear's place, In order to ensure the rigor of the experiment, Blake summoned the eight-eyed giant spider from the Forbidden Forest. Then, he strengthened it as well. He compared the attribute panel before and after. In the end, he confirmed that his previous guesses were all correct. However, the giant eight-eyed spider was different from Big Bear. It wanted to evolve to the next stage. It actually required 50,000 evolution mana. Perhaps this was because it was already a magical animal. But this also explained one thing. That is, even if you become a magical animal, it was still possible for Big Bear to continue evolving. Blake was just not sure now. Big Bear was an ordinary animal. Whether it still had such potential. Subsequently, Blake added points to the giant eight-eyed spider's attack power and speed. However, the giant eight-eyed spider was still in its infancy. Its attribute panel was far inferior to Big Bear's. Fortunately, the growth cycle of the giant eight-eyed spider was not long. And Blake's big druid magic, in addition to promoting the growth of plants, it could also promote the growth of magical animals. After Blake went back, he got into the room of all requests again. He continued to digest the books sent by Grindelwald. However, he didn't read for long. He ran out of the book box. Because he suddenly thought of a problem. That was, animals all had attribute panels. Then there should be plants too. It turned out that there was indeed. But it didn't show how many plants it had tamed. And it was different from animals that could see the panel remotely. Blake needed to stand in front of the plant. Only then could he see the attribute panel. However, the specific attribute template, it was almost exactly the same as the animals. It just lacked a special skill. This discovery made Blake ecstatic. For example, the poisonous tentacle in front of him. After Blake got close to it, he could check its attributes. Poisonous tentacle. Allocable points, 6. Physical strength, 7+. Power, 5+. Speed, 35+. Endurance, 3+. Attack, 50+. Physical defense, 2+. Magic defense, 10+. Existing skills, poisonous sting, venom, entanglement, bite. Required magic power for the next level of mutation, 120,000. Blake also went to check the attribute panels of several other poisonous tentacles. He found that the attributes of each poisonous tentacle were different. So Blake decided to expand the number of magical plants planted. Then he would choose the ones with the best initial attributes to cultivate. Until they mutated. Then he would choose the one with the best attributes. And cultivate it. He could use it as a foundation. With the seeds it produced. Cultivate the second generation of mutant magical plants. Then he would choose the ones with the best attributes to cultivate. Choose the best of the best. After figuring this out, Blake suddenly felt that it was necessary to find a female bear for Shangda. Magical plants could be cultivated into powerful second or even third generation mutants. Why couldn't magical animals? Blake memorized all the ideas and data in his mind. However, he didn't write them down. Because Blake knew his experiment was extremely dangerous. Others might not agree. In order to avoid trouble, it was better to keep it a secret for the time being. It was better to cultivate it himself. Of course, only he could do such an experiment. After all, others couldn't see the attribute panel. Naturally, it was impossible to determine which magical plant it was. Or which magical animal's attributes were better. Blake was busy in the room of everything for a long time. Then he went back to the dormitory to take a shower and sleep. That night, the tired Blake fell asleep as soon as he lay down on the bed. He didn't even read Grindelwald's book collection. After all, Druid's magic calendar. It wasn't infinite. After spending so much magic power, he needed a good rest. Blake, get up. The first class this morning is Transfiguration. We can't be late again. Blake was tired all night. So he slept very well. He couldn't get up by himself in the morning. He glanced at his watch. He looked at his two resentful roommates, who had always been lazy, in surprise. It's only 6:30. Why are you so excited today? Why don't you sleep in? Ah, there's a flying class in the afternoon. Don't you know? Quote. We were so excited about it that we couldn't sleep all night. Roger said excitedly. Blake said, oh. He turned over and went back to sleep. Wasn't it just flying? He thought it was something else. Blake was no stranger to flying. Blake turned over and was about to go back to sleep again. Wayne and Roger were in disbelief. Did he hear what we said just now? It's possible. Yes. This is a flying lesson. Quote. We can really fly. Roger leaned close to Blake's ear and said loudly. He wanted to make sure that Blake didn't miss the most important information. Blake sat up helplessly. Look. I told you he didn't hear the key words, right? Quote. Roger said excitedly. Yes. Who wouldn't be interested in flying? Quote. Wayne said with his eyes closed. He seemed to be imagining himself flying in the sky. Blake scratched his head. Anyway, he couldn't sleep anymore. He had to get up. He was going to eat something. He also sorted out the experimental data hidden in his mind yesterday. Dabao was lying on his side in his small bed. He rolled his eyes at Roger, who was too loud. Then he pulled the small quilt over. He covered his little head with his hand. Blake got up and changed his clothes. He asked as he was busy, how do you know there's a flying lesson in the afternoon? Wayne asked strangely, didn't you see it? It's already announced on the school bulletin board. Quote. We can have a flying lesson this afternoon. But we're going with Ravenclaw. Blake, have you ever flown? Roger asked excitedly. Blake nodded. He said casually. Yes. Just a few days ago. Quote. I turned into an owl. Then I flew directly into the depths of the Forbidden Forest. I saw unicorns, big spiders, and even snake birds. Roger and Wayne looked at Blake as if he was a fool. I knew you weren't awake, Blake. How can a person turn into a cat and an eagle? Yes, are you sure you didn't mix up your dream last night? Blake chuckled. Then you can take it as a joke. How much truth was there? Was it said in a joking way? I rode on a flying broom when I was young. Roger began to talk about his childhood stories of riding a flying broom. What do you mean by almost hitting a Muggle helicopter? What flying about the moors all day on a flying broom? Wayne also bragged about his impressive deeds when he was young. The more Blake listened, the more familiar it sounded. Were all these brats bragging about the same thing? All right, I'm a brat too. Moreover, in their eyes, I seemed to have bragged even more than them just now. Blake didn't care. After changing my clothes, after washing up, she left some food for Dabao, who was lazing in bed. He left the dormitory. Roger and Wayne wouldn't go to breakfast until they were done bragging. As for Dabao, Dabao was much more obedient now. Without Blake's orders, she was completely incapable of causing trouble. Therefore, there was nothing wrong with staying in the dormitory. Anyway, all it did was sleep all day. Moreover, there was no need to worry about it not having any food for lunch or dinner. As long as it sneaked into the common room and acted cute. Most of them were fed by the senior sisters. It opened its belly to eat. I can eat until I vomit. Blake walked towards the auditorium first. He was going to have breakfast first. Then, while it was still early. Then, he went to the room of everything to look at the magical plants he had planted. At 8:00, he would go to the transfiguration class. At this moment, there were already many young wizards eating breakfast in the auditorium. Most of them were first-year freshmen. Because everyone was similar to Roger and Wayne. They were all looking forward to today's flying lesson. So they all woke up very early. All kinds of bragging could be heard. Many people were excited. And there were also many people who were nervous. For example, Neville. For example, Hermione, who was chattering in front of a book called The Amazing Quidditch Ball. Hermione was indeed very nervous. After all, flying was rare. It was a skill that couldn't be immediately understood and mastered by just reading books. Blake greeted her. Then, she walked towards the long table at Hufflepuff. But she threw herself into the strange book of Quidditch. She didn't seem to notice that someone was calling her. At the long table at Hufflepuff, Cedric was enthusiastically explaining the tricks of flying brooms to his juniors. Because he started last year. He was the ball seeker at Hufflepuff. It had to be said. Cedric explained in detail. Blake listened while eating breakfast. After listening once, he felt that he had learned it. Of course, he couldn't rule out the possibility that his brain had learned it. His body didn't have such a situation. But, anyway, he didn't intend to amaze everyone in the flying lesson. So he didn't care much. After all, It was important to know one's own limits. He hadn't had any talents or skills related to flying lessons yet. Although he had flown more than once as a bird. But in the end, it was still flying on a flying broom. It was completely different. Blake still felt that stability was the most important. This was also the reason why he was really listening to Cedric's explanation. At this moment, there seemed to be some chaos at Gryffindor's long table. Blake looked over. It turned out to be Malfoy. After Malfoy had suffered at his hands. Then, he successfully discovered his true enemy. Doesn't anyone in your family send you anything? Harry almost stood up and fought with him. But he was stopped by someone. Just like that, Malfoy sat on Slytherin's long table. Provocatively in front of Harry. Opening the candy sent by his family. Harry gritted his teeth in hatred. Soon after, Neville received a memory ball from his grandmother. It was a glass ball the size of a large marble. It seemed to be filled with white smoke. Just squeeze it. Then, if you forgot to do something, the memory ball would turn red. At this moment, Neville looked at the shiny red memory ball in his hand with a dumbfounded expression. Oh no, what did I forget? Then Malfoy went over to pick a fight. He snatched the memory ball from Neville's hand. Harry, Ronald, and the others immediately stood up. The two sides confronted each other. Blake sat at Hufflepuff's long table with a bowl and watched the show. These two guys loved and hated each other. Blake had no desire to interfere at all. At this moment, Harry actually had the urge to take this opportunity to fight with Malfoy. Unfortunately, he wasn't as carefree as his father. Blake guessed. If it was Jamie Potter. Maybe Malfoy was already lying on the ground. Maybe there was a fist mark on his face. However, the fight didn't happen in the end. Because Professor McGonagall appeared. What's going on? Malfoy blocked the memory ball. Neville complained. Malfoy threw the memory ball back. Wait and see. His face was gloomy. With that, he ran away. Professor McGonagall gave the little lions of his school a warning look. He told them not to act rashly. Then he quickly walked over to Blake's side. Blake put down his bowl. He thought that he didn't have time to do anything today. Mr. Green, Professor Dumbledore asked me to give this to you. Professor McGonagall handed a black book to Blake. Oh, thank you, Professor McGonagall. Blake took the black book. The cover of this book. With Blake's knowledge of magical animals. He could tell at a glance. This was made of black dragon skin. Just the cover alone was so expensive. One could imagine how precious this book was. And, judging from the white marks on the black dragon skin, this book seemed to have a certain history. Professor McGonagall had already left in a hurry. Blake put the book on the table. He slowly opened it. He saw a note on the title page. The words on the note were written in circles. It was very iconic. This is a small test that my old friend gave you. 17. You just need to finish reading and master the knowledge in this book. You'll pass the test. At that time, his library will be open for you to read. This is a good opportunity, Blake. Don't miss it. Come on. Blake put away the note. His face was full of interest as he looked at the book. It was a test. But there wasn't even a deadline. In other words, there was no time limit. This also showed the confidence of the owner of the book. You can read it for as long as you want. If you can't understand it, don't think about my library. Blake opened the book. He saw that the book recorded the knowledge of alchemy. Blake's eyes lit up. As expected of you, Nicole LeMay. This belonged to him alone. The confidence of a legendary alchemist. Then how can I let you down? Blake was excited. He knew. As long as he understood the book. In that case, he would be considered to have established a relationship with Nico Lamore. Blake was happy to be able to read his library to his heart's content. He was still extremely interested. Blake carefully put the book away in the pocket of his hovering cloak. He had a hunch. This book would allow his alchemy skills to improve tremendously. Otherwise, Nicole wouldn't be so confident. Blake then went to the "everything will be granted" room. Just as he walked in. Then, he realized that he was wearing a protective suit. Cassandra was tending to the poison tentacles and the devil's web. The only exception was Blake, a big druid, who wouldn't be attacked by plants. Others approached the poisonous tentacles without wearing protective clothing. This was very unwise. Unless it was an extremely experienced herbalist or potion master. Why did you plant so many? I think a few of them are enough. Cassandra struggled to break free from the poisonous tentacles. The protective suit was specially obtained by Blake through Grindelwald. A spell was placed on the surface. It was enough to automatically deflect the attacks of these dangerous magical plants. It was a very rare thing. Of course, it couldn't be obtained through regular channels. However, irregular channels. Grindelwald had more. Blake said before. He wanted to plant some dangerous magical plants at Hogwarts. He needed protective measures. When Grindelwald heard that Blake wanted to stay at Hogwarts, after secretly doing something that Dumbledore would never agree to, he immediately agreed. The children of the Grindelwald family should have their own opinions. What's the point of being as docile as a sheep? Even Newt couldn't compare to such a child. So, he quickly followed Blake's request. He sent Blake 2 sets of expensive protective suits. Of course, these 2 sets of protective suits. Blake left them for Cassandra and Hermione, who were his assistants. Because I need to do some experiments. Cassandra. Quote. Blake approached the poisonous tentacles. They seemed to have felt Blake's approach. The tentacles and vines that were originally waving around. They immediately stopped. Do experiments. What experiments? Quote. Cassandra struggled to take off the protective suit. Blake didn't mean to hide it. I want to be among these plants. Pick the best one. Then focus on cultivating it. Try to grow a stronger second or third generation with stronger romantic and medicinal effects. Cassandra looked at Blake in confusion. But, what are you going to do with a stronger plant? This doesn't sound like something you'd ask. Cassandra, where's the ambition of being a Slytherin? Quote. Blake said with a smile. Cassandra rolled her eyes. You're so ambitious. You don't look like a Hufflepuff. Okay, let's stop joking. I'm doing this to cultivate a new magical plant species. If it's a new variety, it might produce some new medicinal effects. If we can figure out the effects of these drugs. This is not only a contribution to herbology. Even potioneering might be affected. Don't you want to witness it with me? Think about it. Your name might be on the chocolate frog card. Cassandra thought about it. If they could really cultivate a new species of magical plant and test out the new medicinal effects, it might indeed bring a huge change to herbology and potioneering. At that time, her name would not be on the 3.2 gram strength frog card. Even if it was in the history books of magic. Or her portrait would be hung on the wall of Hogwarts. It was all possible. Slytherin was an ambitious Slytherin. How could Cassandra not be interested? Okay. I'm in. Quote. Then, welcome to me, Cassandra. Blake smiled and opened his hands. He welcomed Cassandra. This was actually just a habitual action. However, Cassandra seemed to have misunderstood. She froze for a moment. And then, she walked up. She seemed to really want to hug Blake. What the fool? Blake was stunned. This was a misunderstanding. If he refused at this time, she would definitely cry for a long time, right? Forget it. It was just a normal hug between friends. But Blake didn't know. He let Beck, who came in to clean up. He was recording all of his actions. Recording all of it. Numungard. The house elf, Beck, had already recorded everything he saw. He told Grindelwald everything through the communication notebook. Grindelwald put down the communication notebook in his hand. He laughed out loud. Not bad. Very good. Quote. This is a way to persuade people to join your camp. It's exactly the same as me back then. Haha, I told you, Dumbledore. This child is obviously more like me. Just keep doing it, good boy. How can you lack helpers to achieve great things? Well, you have good taste. I heard that the Worley family is an influential pureblood family. It's a good calendar to start with the youngest genius in their family. 1:30 p.m. Less than an hour after lunch. Blake followed the little wizards from Hufflepuff. They came to the grass outside the castle. They were ready for flying lessons. There were 4 consecutive flying lessons in the afternoon. The little wizards from Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw went first. At 3:30 p.m. It was Gryffindor and Slytherin's turn to start their flying lessons. Today, the flying lesson professor, Ms. Hooch, would be more tired. The grass was adjacent to the Quidditch field. When Blake walked to the grass. On the grass, there were enough flying brooms placed there. Each one was separated by a person's distance. Just one broom. Blake looked at the brooms on the ground. They were all old products. However, they were used for newbies to learn. Actually, it was just right. The little wizards from Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw had just arrived at the grass. The flying lesson professor, Ms. Hooch, appeared. She was a witch with a strange appearance. She had short gray hair. But her eyes were yellow. Like the eyes of an eagle. Come on, children. Hurry up and move. Everyone, stand next to a flying broom. Hurry up, hurry up. Blake casually stood next to a broom. These brooms were broken and old anyway. There was no difference. Stretch out your right hand and place it above the broom handle. Ms. Hooch said as she walked. Then say, get up. When Ms. Hooch walked in front of Blake, he happened to put his hand on the broom. Whoosh. Blake didn't even have time to shout. The broom flew into the air. Slap. Blake held the broom. The broom flew too fast just now. He felt his palm hurt a little from being hit by the broom. Get up. At this time, Blake finally shouted his lines. Blake looked at Ms. Hooch, who was staring at him, awkwardly. Don't look at me. I don't know what happened either. This broom didn't follow the script. He hadn't even shouted yet. It's coming up. 30 feet ding. Detected the emotion of surprise. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a gold treasure chest. Quote. Today's drop rate seems to be pretty good. Blake was pleasantly surprised. After all, under normal circumstances, this level of emotional fluctuation. Normally, they would only give him a silver treasure chest. However, he didn't expect it to be a gold treasure chest. Blake thought for a moment. This golden treasure chest was dropped by Ms. Hooch. In that case, it was very likely that a flying skill would be dropped. Since that's the case, Blake didn't hesitate. He decisively opened the golden treasure chest. Ding. Opening the golden treasure chest. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining top-grade flying talent tool type. Quote. Ding. It has been detected that the host already possesses the best flight talent tool type. Quote. Ding. Changing the reward to 1000 flying mastery tool type experience points. Quote. Blake's body went numb. This was a huge loss. This was the only bad thing about the system. It only showed the talent that was opened. The talent that he originally had was not displayed. Or else, if he had discovered that he had the best flight talent earlier, he wouldn't have wasted a golden treasure chest. Wasn't it a synthetic diamond treasure chest? Blake quietly opened his attribute panel. Then he found out. Although it was repeated. But because it was exactly opened. So his talent column was there. A new entry for the best flight talent tool type appeared. Blake was speechless. System, do you have the function of feedback system bugs? But this keyword didn't trigger successfully. When Blake was sad. Ms. Hooch looked at Blake happily. Very good. Add 5 points for Hufflepuff. As soon as he opened his mouth, the broom flew up to respond. There were many. But before he could open his mouth, the broom flew up to him. But it was extremely rare. This proved that his flying talent must be extremely good. Because he was just standing next to the broom. And he got the broom's approval. So Ms. Hooch didn't hesitate to add 5 points to Blake. Of course, if Blake could hear Ms. Hooch's thoughts, he wouldn't waste a golden treasure chest. At this moment, everyone saw Blake's performance. They were immediately motivated. Everyone's initial thoughts were basically the same. Blake could do it. I can do it too. Then everyone began to put their hands above the brooms. They shouted with all their might. Get up. Only a few people did. The brooms immediately flew up. Among them, including Blake's roommate, Roger. Roger looked at the brooms in his hands excitedly. I knew I was a genius. Blake's other roommate, Wayne, didn't do so well. After he concentrated and shouted several times, the brooms under his hands flew up reluctantly. Oh, this broom must be broken. He muttered helplessly. Not long after, everyone grabbed their brooms in their hands. Okay. Children. All of you, look over here. Ms. Hooch began the second stage of teaching. She demonstrated to everyone how to ride the brooms without slipping off their heads. And she walked around in the team. She corrected everyone's grip. After seeing that everyone had no problems. Okay, when I blow the whistle, you kick your legs and leave the ground. Remember, kick hard. Not far away, Blake heard this. He nodded. Got it. Kick hard. Okay, hold the brooms firmly. We'll go up a few feet first. Then lean forward slightly. Fall back to the ground vertically. Quote. Listen to my whistle. 3, 2, beep. The little wizards kicked hard on the ground. Then the flying brooms carried them and flew up shakily. However, before they could feel the excitement of flying off the ground, a voice suddenly rang out. Next to them, they heard. Whoosh. A sound was heard. Then they found that something next to them whizzed up into the sky. Ms. Hooch froze for a moment. Then she looked at Blake's original position. Where is he? Oh. Come back, child. Quote. Ms. Hodge finally reacted. That's the kid coming right up. But that shouldn't be the case. How could the school's brooms have such speed? Ms. Hooch recalled the speed just now. Even the afterimage was left behind. However, there was no time to think. All of you, come down and put the brooms on the ground. Ms. Hooch anxiously calmed everyone down. Then, he rode the broom and rose into the air. She had to hurry and chase after that child. However, she had only just started flying. Then, a shadow flashed past everyone's heads, leaving behind a long string of excited laughter. Get back here. Ms. Hooch almost died of anger. This afterimage was, of course, Blake, the unlucky kid. He was taking off. He followed Ms. Hooch's instructions to the letter. When the whistle sounded, then, he kicked hard with his legs. But he had forgotten how strong he was. Of course, he also forgot how berserk his magic was. It was the flight of a flying broom. In the first place, it needed to automatically draw upon the magical power of the adepts to provide power. Just like a magic wand. So, as soon as Blake provided this magical power, then, Blake felt as if he had accidentally twisted the accelerator of a motorcycle. The broom rose into the sky with a whoosh. It was so fast that Blake thought for a moment. The broom under him was not the old and broken training broom from the school. It was a crossbow that was only produced a few years later. Blake, who was flying at top speed, was not worried that he would fall to his death. After all, he was an archdruid. If he really fell, he would turn into a bird and land on the ground. He wouldn't fall to his death. Looking at the blue sky above his head. I'm already here. Blake excitedly tried to grab the broom and lean forward. Whoosh. The broom carried Blake and once again left an afterimage. This is much faster than transforming. Quote. But, why can the brooms in this school fly so fast? However, at top speed, Blake didn't think so much. He dived directly. Then, it flew over everyone's heads, leaving behind waves of carefree laughter. And it caused waves of exclamations from the crowd. After a long time, Blake stood on the grass with his eyebrows drooping. Next to him, the broom was lying on the ground, shivering. And the tail of the broom was emitting clouds of black smoke from time to time. Around him, the students who had just witnessed all of this. They all looked at Blake with reverence. Because he was really flying too fast. Even Ms. Hooch couldn't catch up. And the strongest one was. At such a fast speed. He was actually able to land on the ground smoothly. Instead of smashing into a pile of meat paste on the outer wall of the castle. You almost scared me to death. Ms. Hooch said angrily. What the hell is going on? In fact, she also wanted to know how Blake could fly so fast. Even though at this time, that poor broom might be scrapped. But if he knew the trick, maybe he could accidentally promote a new wave of flying technology. After hearing the system prompt, Ms. Hooch was so angry that she dropped another gold treasure chest for herself. Blake's gloomy mood instantly vanished. It's just like what you said. Push hard, and then, I flew. It was so fast that I was a little scared. Then, my body accidentally leaned forward. And then, Ms. Hooch didn't really believe it. Was it really that simple? It was that simple to make that worn-out broom fly at a speed that hasn't flown out since it left the factory. Maybe there's something wrong with my magic. Blake said helplessly. In fact, when I bought a wand at Ollivander's wand shop. Because the magic was too violent, it exploded a lot of wands. So, Mr. Ollivander specially made a metal wand for me. Ms. Hooch looked at Blake in surprise as he took out his long and thick wand. It was actually a metal wand. If that's the case, maybe what he said was actually true. Okay, You go to Professor Sprout's office and wait for a while. Your situation is a bit special. I can't judge if you're still suitable to continue using the flying broom. We have to study it to come to a conclusion. Blake could only under the admiring gaze of the crowd. He helplessly walked to Professor Sprout's office. Although this wave helped him earn a lot of treasure chests, this was indeed not intentional. Because he really didn't come into contact with the flying broom before. He didn't know that the principle of the flying broom was similar to the wand. But it was different from those exploding wands. The flying broom was much sturdier. Because he could convert all of Blake's magic into speed. Give vent to viciously. That was why Blake could fly so fast. However, that broom was probably going to be scrapped. Very soon. Blake came to the door of Professor Sprout's office. Blake knocked on the door. Please come in at 740. Professor Sprout's gentle voice came from inside. Blake opened the door. Professor Sprout was standing by the window, tending to a strange orchid with a kind face. Ah, Blake, why are you looking for me? Don't you guys have flying lessons this afternoon? Professor Sprout asked in confusion. It's like this, Professor, I seem to have gotten into trouble. Blake recounted what had happened to him in the flying class. Then, in order to convince Professor Sprout, once again, he took out his wand. Professor Sprout listened carefully to Zhang Zian. It's not your fault, child. I heard about you buying a wand from Professor Dumbledore. Your magic is very violent, but you didn't do it on purpose, did you? Blake said gratefully, thank you for your trust and understanding, Professor Sprout. But, I'm afraid I won't be able to touch a flying broom in the future. Professor Sprout smiled and said, that's not necessarily true. When Professor Dumbledore told me about you buying a wand, he once said that as long as you pay attention to controlling your magic, you can use an ordinary wand. On the other hand, if you knew in advance that the flying broom was similar to a wand, will you pay attention to restraining your magic power? Blake nodded. That was true. If he knew that the flying broom would also explode, then he would never believe Ms. Hooch's words and kick it hard. And he did have the ability to control his magic without hurting the broom. Don't worry. Professor Sprout returned to his desk. He picked up a quill and seemed to be writing something. You just need to control your magic. Plus, a good broom. So, you don't have to worry about not having a broom in the future. Professor Sprout said. He handed the parchment paper to Blake. I want to get a good broom. It seems that you can only join our school's Quidditch team. Professor Sprout looked at him with a smile. Blake was shocked. In fact, he didn't have to ride a flying broom. It was just that when the mood was right, he naturally got into character for a while. He didn't expect. Professor Sprout misunderstood. Professor Sprout had a good impression of Blake. After seeing that Blake seemed to be depressed, because he wouldn't be able to touch a flying broom in the future. So, he naturally thought of a good idea for him. As for Blake's flying skills, at such a high speed, he was able to reach his office unscathed. Was it possible that he had no talent? So, Professor Sprout waved his quill. Blake became the youngest Quidditch player in Hogwarts hundreds of years. The kind that was a few hours earlier than Harry. Although you have to restrain yourself. An ordinary broom can also be used. But I still hope that you can fly freely. The brooms on the market right now definitely can't meet this requirement. So, you have to give this application I wrote to Professor Dumbledore. And, you should know that Professor Dumbledore is also a master of alchemy. He'll get you a broom that's suitable for you. Professor Sprout said. Blake looked at the application in his hand. Are you sure Professor Dumbledore will really agree? Don't worry, he will definitely agree. Walking out of Professor Sprout's office, Blake held the application that Professor Sprout wrote for him. Walking in the direction of the principal's office. After all, logically speaking, first-year wizards were not allowed to participate in the Quidditch competition. They couldn't even hold a broom. So this matter really had to be applied. Blake, on the other hand, needed a special broom. Given Blake's relationship with Professor Dumbledore, Professor Sprout thought, Professor Dumbledore would definitely help him solve it. Blake was actually not opposed to joining the Quidditch team. Or rather, joining the Quidditch team was also one of his plans. But he didn't expect it would be so fast. He originally planned to do it step by step. He would only participate in the player selection when he was in his second year. After all, he had to show off in front of the whole school. The number of treasure chests he obtained. It would definitely be extremely impressive. Since this time it was a coincidence. He had brought forward his plan. Blake didn't plan to give up. And coincidentally, because he was flying at high speed just now, so his flying ability experience skyrocketed. When he was intercepted by Ms. Hooch, his flying skill experience bar was only a little bit away from the beginner proficiency level. This was only his first time flying. If he could get his own broom and fly a few laps without any restrictions, then it would be too easy for his flying skill to level up. Proficiency in this kind of skill. It was much easier to level up than proficiency in a major subject like alchemy. Not long after, he arrived in front of the dripping stone beast. Behind the stone beast was Dumbledore's office. Password. The dripping stone beast said in a muffled voice. ZZB Candy. Wrong password. Hiss, you've changed your tastes so quickly. Then, Snow Lemon. Wrong password, but Dumbledore told me to let you in. The guardian stone beast outside the principal's room. Sometimes, it was to help the principal fend off people he didn't want to see. As for Blake, naturally, he was not included in this list. In the principal's office, when Blake pushed the door open and came in, just then, he saw a person walking out from inside. His complexion didn't look very good. Or it could be said that his complexion had never been good. His signature aquiline nose, and that greasy hair. Blake recognized him at a glance. This was Snape. He had yet to attend the potions class. Therefore, this was the first time they had met at such a close distance. So, you're the one who told Professor Dumbledore. I don't even eat. They're all watching Quirrell. Blake glanced at Dumbledore in surprise. You sold me out just like that. You should have reminded him to be careful when he was watching. Why did you mention me? Are you trying to make him hate me? Snape took in Blake's expression. Then, he swung his long black robe. He left the principal's office. Professor, you. Dumbledore sighed. I didn't say it. He guessed it. I just told him to be careful because even the students noticed that he was watching Quirrell. Then he guessed it. After all, he's a nerd. The only student who comes to my place often. Seems like only you. Blake was stunned. Oh no, Professor Snape might be a little stingy. It seemed that the potions class on Friday afternoon. He couldn't escape Snape's punishment. How could he escape after offending the old bat? You think too much. So, what did you do today? Professor, you can actually hope for something good from me. Blake took out Professor Sprout's application form. He handed it to Dumbledore. Dumbledore stood next to the table. He grabbed a wriggling cockroach and stuffed it into his mouth. He looked at the application form. Blake looked at the box of cockroaches. Although he knew it was a delicious tasting type of candy. But it couldn't arouse his appetite at all. He always felt that there might be a few real cockroaches mixed in. It's my fault for neglecting it. Dumbledore put down the application. You can even blow up a wand. How can a broom be avoided? But I can solve this problem. You just need to modify the flying broom. I'm also a master alchemist, and I know your situation very well. So, I can help you solve this problem. Blake looked at Dumbledore. So, you agreed right away. What? You agreed to let me join the Quidditch team. Of course. Why not? Quote. First-year students are not allowed to have flying brooms and participate in Quidditch games. It's for the safety of the freshmen. But according to Professor Sprout, you can fly at that speed. You can still grasp the direction steadily and land smoothly. I think you have enough ability to protect yourself. So, I agree. I'll get you a good broom as soon as possible. You have to believe in some of my connections and my alchemy skills. Then, Blake was coaxed out of the principal's office by Dumbledore in a daze. Professor Dumbledore also urged him to complete Nico Lamore's test as soon as possible. He thought he would have to explain to Dumbledore. Explain what he said. Maybe he could even get a treasure chest from Dumbledore or something. But Dumbledore was very calm. It was as if he was prepared for all of Blake's actions. Shouldn't calmness be an emotion? Excessive calmness. Shouldn't you give me a treasure chest too? The system was silent. This system is indeed buggy. Blake muttered to himself as he left the principal's office. There was only flying class in the afternoon. Because Blake was kicked out early. So, he had an extra free afternoon. So, he first went to the room of all requests. He took care of his magical plants. In the room of all requests. He had already planted all the seeds that Cassandra gave him. He took turns strengthening these plants every day. It was quite time-consuming. After the strengthening, he took out a lot of food. He ate to replenish his strength and magic. He read the manuscript that Nico Lamore sent over. It had to be said. Nick LeMay is in this manuscript. The knowledge recorded was indeed very profound. You could tell from the fact that Nico LeMay had sent over a manuscript of this caliber. Indeed, he did not underestimate Blake. The test given was also extremely difficult. However, this was a great gift. Although the speed of learning this book was very slow at the beginning. Blake was always paying attention to his alchemy experience. Every time he completely understood a small paragraph. When he checked his experience again, he would find that his alchemy experience had increased by a small amount. If Blake had an express indicator on his forehead, then, when he buried himself in a book, he always has a +20 on his forehead. 20 ideographic period. Plus. The number 20 inches popped up like crazy. And so it went on. Even if the next level of alchemy mastery required 100,000 express. That wouldn't take much time. Moreover, the more Blake read, the higher his alchemy level became. The higher the standard, the faster the learning speed. This manuscript. It wouldn't stump Blake for long. Furthermore, even after completing the test, Nico LeMay regretted it. He didn't want him to look at his own book collection. Blake didn't lose out either. Because just by looking at this manuscript, it was enough to greatly improve his alchemy. But, not long after, Blake got into the book box again. Because this was in Nico LeMay's manuscript. It involved a part of the ancient Nihon knowledge. This part of the ancient Nihon knowledge. It just so happened that Blake hadn't mastered it yet. He had to put down the manuscript for the time being. First, he had to learn a wave of ancient Nihon. But this was normal. Alchemy was originally involved in a wide range of subjects. Others had hundreds of years of research experience. Even if Blake was extremely talented, he couldn't have been in contact with alchemy for more than a month. He had to catch up with it. It would take at least a few months. The current captain of the Hufflepuff Quidditch team. It was Marcus Vincent, a 7th grade student this year. In the evening, Blake found him on the sidelines of the Quidditch stadium. Marcus carried his broom on his shoulder. He was carefully looking at the letter of introduction in his hand. It didn't seem fake. But, the letter said. The little thing in front of him. It was a first-year student. But a new team member who could fly at more than 60 miles per hour, 100 kilometers per hour. Marcus looked at the little thing in front of him. He kept looking up and down. His face was full of doubt. If it weren't for the fact that the letter of introduction was signed by Professor Sprout and Professor Dumbledore. There was no pretense. He had already thrown it out. He had thrown this little thing out. How could he not know about the old brooms at school? 60 miles per hour. These old brooms were brand new from the factory. He didn't even know if they could fly at 30 miles per hour. You. Come with me, fly a lap. Quote. Blake had no choice but to follow. On the Quidditch field, the Hufflepuff players were already waiting for training. Cedric was also there. He saw Blake appear on the training ground. He was a little surprised. What are you doing? He's a new player who was specially approved to join our team. I have to test his ability first. Marcus answered Cedric's question. While picking a broom for Blake in the broom closet. But his words made everyone's eyes widen in shock. Cedric looked at Blake in surprise. You're really joining our Quidditch team? Blake nodded. Doesn't he look like he's in his first year? Another player asked in shock. That's why I said it was specially approved. Marcus grumbled. He almost said the words, through the back door. So what if he went through the back door? 60 miles per hour. This bragging, did it have to be so exaggerated? Marcus searched for a while. Then he picked out a broom from the broom closet. This broom looked a little newer than the one in the training class. This is it. Marcus threw the broom to Blake. Fly a lap first and let me see. Do your best. Blake hesitated. Marcus curled his lips in dissatisfaction. Sure enough, he went through the back door. Otherwise, why are you hesitating? You're afraid of making a fool of yourself. What? You don't dare. Quote. If you don't dare, then go back. Be a good boy and wait for your second year. Then you can participate in the player selection. Quote. Blake scratched his head. No, you just told me to fly with all my strength. But if I fly with all my strength, the broom won't be able to withstand it. Marcus smiled. Broom won't be able to withstand it. Haha, don't worry. Meteor series. The style is a little old-fashioned. But the quality is still guaranteed. Fly with all your might. If the broom is broken, I will pay for it. Quote. Blake immediately smiled when he heard this. You don't need me to compensate you. You should have told me earlier. Quote. Then I'll start. Blake said as he carried the broom excitedly. They came to the open space in front of them and prepared to take off. Originally, his flight skill was about to break through to basic mastery. He only needed a little more experience. Marcus had him fly 2 full circles. This was really giving him a pillow when he was sleepy. Blake weighed the flying broom in his hand. He nodded his head in satisfaction. This one would definitely last longer than the one in the afternoon. Blake stepped forward excitedly. Then, boom. Excellent. Marcus stood closest to her. He felt a strong gust of wind blow past his face. Then, Blake's figure disappeared. Where did it go? Marcus was dumbfounded. Why did he suddenly disappear? Captain. Above. Cedric pointed to the sky. Marcus raised his head. Then, he saw an afterimage swooping down from the sky. Swoosh. Hey. Do you want to die? Pull it up. Quote. Although Marcus was unhappy that Blake took the back door. But he didn't want to see this junior die in front of him. Just as Marcus was about to stand at attention in silence. Just as the afterimage was about to reach the ground, the figure on the broom suddenly turned over. Then, he agilely pulled the broom up. Minsky's feint. Minsky's feint at such a high speed, how is it possible? How can he pull it up with such a big inertia? Blake swept over everyone's heads. The wind brought about by him. It messed up Marcus's hair. At this time, Marcus still didn't know where they were. Blake really did have something. Blake. Enough. Come down. Quote. Blake. Stop your divine ability. When Blake came in front of Marcus again, Marcus's eyes were full of excitement. Ever since he joined the school's Quidditch team in the 3rd year. He was the goalkeeper. Then he became the captain in the 5th year. Hufflepuff had never won a Quidditch championship. This year was already his last year in school. But now, with Blake, this year, they really had a chance to win the championship. Cup. We must win the championship this year. Are you confident? Yes. Louder. You want to play Quidditch so quietly. Quote. We are confident. Very good. Very energetic. Quote. We must win the championship this year. What position do you want to play? We can build a tactical system with you as the core. Marcus asked as he picked up the broom that Blake had ravaged. The tail of the broom had begun to smoke. Blake hadn't spoken yet. Cedric's hand had already patted Blake's shoulder. You're so fast. Why don't you be the ball seeker? Quote. Cedric was the ball seeker of the Hufflepuff team. But he saw Blake riding an old broom. After all, he had such a speed. He knew it. Blake was more suitable for the position of ball seeker than him. Just imagine. When the Golden Cat Bandit appeared. Which ball seeker could have Blake's speed? Even if he started later, he would definitely be able to catch it first. Blake shook his head. I don't really want to be a ball seeker. Why? Well, I want to score goals. I want to be a ball chaser. Blake said honestly. His purpose of joining the Quidditch team. It was to show off his skills. Although a ball seeker had the aura of a protagonist. Most of the time, if there was no big gap in the score. Once they caught the Golden Cat Bandit, they would win. There would be a reversal. Or the satisfaction of deciding the outcome. Before the Golden Cat Bandit appeared. Ball Seeker was too boring. He could only wander around. If the Golden Cat Bandit didn't appear in the early stage. Then most of the time, there would be no chance to show off his skills. This was contrary to Blake's original intention of wanting to get the treasure chest. As for the batter. In fact, it was still in line with Blake's requirements. The batter's task. It was to hit the 2 wandering balls with a stick at the opposing players. And to protect his players from being hit by the wandering balls. Blake was indeed very confident that he could show off in the batter's position. After all, with his skills and strength, protecting his teammates was naturally no problem. Similarly, with Blake's abnormal strength, compared to protecting his teammates, it might be easier to send all the opposing players off the field. Then wouldn't the game be over? How could he get the treasure chest? But if it was a ball seeker, that would be different. Every Quidditch team had 3 ball seekers. They only needed to throw the ghost fly into the other team's goal to score. In other words, as long as he kept scoring goals, he could continue to maintain the high spirits of the 867 crowd. In that case, every game, he would definitely be able to get close to the treasure chest. Ball seeker. Marcus nodded. With your speed and skills, ball seeker is indeed very suitable for you. But ball seeker's speed and skills. You must have some pitching skills. But it doesn't matter. Throwing skills were much easier to practice than flying skills. The other team members were also looking at Blake eagerly. Originally, Hufflepuff's 3 suitors weren't bothered by Blake's arrival. They might feel unhappy that their position had been taken away. After all, Blake's flying skills were too powerful. At such a high speed, he could even do Wronski's feint. Blake would definitely be the main player. As for the 3 of them, they would just rotate. But, there's still a core problem. Blake ideographic period. Marcus looked at the broom in his hand that was confirmed to be useless. You have to find a good broom that can let you fly. Are you kidding me? Ronald looked at Harry in shock. Because Harry had just told him. In the afternoon, he helped Neville retrieve the memory ball thrown by Malfoy. And after being taken away by Professor McGonagall, it wasn't that he was fired or locked up. Instead, he was pulled into the Gryffindor Quidditch team by Professor McGonagall. First-year ball seeker. But first-year students are never. What I'm saying is, you must be the youngest member of the Academy team in many years. It's been a century, added Harry. Wood told me. This is indeed something to be proud of. It was just that. Actually, you're not. Harry. Hermione sat across from Harry and Ronald. What do you mean? Ronald's eyes widened. Before this, there's never been. Oh, of course, but a few hours before Harry was selected into the team. Blake Green from Hufflepuff was pulled into Hufflepuff's Quidditch team. Hermione said with a smile. Blake could be pulled into the team. She also seemed very happy. Oh, come on. Don't joke around. Quote. Ronald expressed his disbelief. Hermione shrugged. Believe it or not, they didn't keep it a secret. I just saw them training in the Quidditch stadium. Marcus and Wood were different. Wood chose to keep it a secret. They wanted to use Harry as their secret weapon. But Marcus couldn't wait to let the whole world know. They had a new genius player this year. In fact, many people already knew about it. Harry's eyes widened in shock. A minute ago, he thought that he was one of a kind. However, Blake gave him a surprise once again. Then, is he also a ball seeker? Not really. Harry suddenly heard 2 identical voices in his ear. Fred and George walked over. They patted Harry on the shoulder. Good job, Ha. Wood told us. We're also on the school team. George and I are both batters on the school team. Harry asked curiously, you just said that Blake isn't a ball seeker. Fred and George looked at each other. In fact, he's a ball seeker for Hufflepuff. We went to take a peek at their training. Well, Blake flies very fast. But it seems like a broom is useless. Harry didn't understand what Fred meant by, broom is useless. But he heard the key word. That was, Blake flew very fast. Don't worry, Harry. Leave Blake to us. Although he's very much to our liking. But we have to meet in the game. We won't hold back. Fred and George waved their bats at the same time. Hufflepuff's batters can't beat ours. Although there's Blake as a variable. But our goal this year is still the Quidditch Cup. When Blake walked briskly into the cafeteria, he clearly felt a large wave of bronze treasure chests entering his account. Blake knew. As a grade 1 magus, he was going to do it. The news of him joining the school's Quidditch team had spread. After all, treasure chests began to enter his account before he entered the auditorium. There were even 1 or 2 gold treasure chests. Very good. He was one step closer to the supreme treasure chest. Blake walked quickly to Hufflepuff's long table. Just now, after he destroyed 2 more brooms. Finally, He found the balance point of magic power. Although the speed was slower than before. But it was still very fast. Now, even if Dumbledore didn't help him with the brooms, he could still use the school's old brooms to kill everyone. But he might overdraw the old broom's lifespan. Hermione, what's wrong with you? Blake just happened to run into Hermione. But she seemed to be angry. Blake used 0.01 seconds to recall what he had done. Well, she shouldn't be angry because of me. After all, the system didn't prompt. They're so selfish. What? Just now, Harry and the others actually agreed to a duel with Malfoy tonight. Quote. God knows how many points Gryffindor will lose if they get caught. Hermione said angrily. Blake could understand why Hermione was so angry. Because of Gryffindor's score. A large part of it. It was Hermione's contribution. Especially because of Blake. Therefore, Hermione wanted to snatch the points. That was practically a hellish level of difficulty. She worked so hard to earn the points. He could only watch helplessly as the two idiots who refused to listen to his advice squandered it. Anyone would collapse. They'd rather believe in Malfoy's character than believe that I'm the reincarnation of Merlin. Blake laughed as he joked. What? Hermione didn't quite understand Blake's words. Oh, nothing. I mean, Malfoy's words can't be trusted. I bet he won't go to the appointment tonight. Instead, he'll report to Filch. The kind that reports the time and place clearly. When the time comes, if Filch isn't too useless, then those two idiots will definitely be caught. Hermione frowned. I have to stop them. The points I worked so hard to earn. Hermione left the auditorium in a frenzy. Blake looked at her back. He didn't have any intention of interfering. His words wouldn't change the direction of the plot. If he remembered correctly. Then they would break into the corridor on the 4th floor tonight. Then he saw Hagrid's little cutie, Lu Wei, the three-headed dog. If it continued like this, he didn't interfere. In the end, Quirrell would definitely be killed by Harry. Since that was the case, he could just lie down. Why should he interfere with Dumbledore's plan? It was better to go home and study his own alchemy. The homework assigned by the professors. For Blake, it was very simple. After he finished his paper on transfiguration, he even had time to check it for Wayne and Roger. Then he went out. Not to intervene in Harry's special operation tonight. Instead, he was going to continue reading in the room of all requests. Since Nico LeMay's manuscript was a test, there was no time limit. Then Blake decided he'd better finish reading Grindelwald's books first. After all, while reading the manuscript, after reading for a while, he had to stop. He had to study another round of knowledge before he could come back and continue reading. It was very uncomfortable. It was better to finish reading the books sent by Grindelwald. He waited until he had mastered the knowledge in all fields. Then he would read Nico LeMay's manuscript. It would be much faster. Time passed quickly when he was engrossed in reading. Blake glanced at his equipment watch. It was already 12:00 in the evening. He packed up his things. He took one last look at his precious plants. Then he used the levitation cloak to become invisible. He left the room of all requests directly. Blake had just gone down to the 4th floor. He heard a burst of noisy footsteps and screams. Of course, there was also Filch's panting sound. It didn't take long for Blake to hear Pippi's voice. If you don't say please, I'll say I don't know anything. Then there was Filch's voice, which was suppressing his anger. Okay, please tell me. I don't know anything. Ha ha ha. Naughty left quickly. Filch cursed in exasperation. Then he continued to carry his chandelier. He wanted to continue looking for people. Blake knew that he had run into Filch's arrest of Harry and the others. He stood still and had no intention of intervening. Filch's figure soon came out from the corner. Because Blake was invisible. So he stood quietly beside him. He wanted to get out of the way. Meow. Madame Loris meowed softly in the direction of Blake. Even though Blake was invisible, she could also keenly detect the aura of the great druid on Blake's body, which made her feel comfortable. What's wrong? Do you smell anything? Filch immediately perked up. He immediately looked in the direction of Blake. Then, he rushed over. Blake took a step to the side. Only then did he realize that there was a door behind him. Behind the door was an empty classroom. Filch didn't see Blake. But because of Madame Dolores. Therefore, He mistakenly thought that the troublemakers were all hiding in the empty classroom. Blake waited until Filch went in. He continued to walk forward. But as soon as he turned the corner, he saw Harry and the others running in his direction. Huh. Blake was stunned. He looked back at the lights in the empty classroom. Filch would be out soon. According to this trend, they would come face to face with Filch. If they met face to face, they wouldn't be able to escape. Blake felt a little strange. Logically speaking, they shouldn't be caught tonight. Suddenly, he remembered. If it wasn't for Madame Loris calling out to him, he would have been dead already. Filch would not search the empty classroom either. If Filch hadn't searched the empty classroom, he might have gone upstairs by now. They wouldn't have bumped into Harry and the others. In other words, Blake still accidentally interfered. Filch was about to come out and bump into these guys. Tisk! Blake waved his hand helplessly. Then, the classroom door in front of Filch was slammed shut with a loud bang. Hey! Who's outside? Filch slammed the door angrily. He concluded that there must be someone outside. Then he locked him in the classroom. Harry and the others were taken aback. But since Filch accidentally locked himself in the classroom, of course, they had to keep running. They had just met Lu Wei, the three-headed dog. Their legs were still weak. They were scared by Filch again. In fact, they were almost at their limit. Harry, Ronald, and Neville were still okay. But Hermione was behind them. He was already exhausted. The group ran through the classroom door with all their might. Then they ran frantically to the Gryffindor common room. Just as they passed the classroom door. Ouch! Hermione, whose legs were weak, was careless. He stepped on the invisible Blake's foot. He fell to the ground with a plop. And Harry and the others were still in shock. They didn't notice that one person was missing from the back of the team. They ran away quickly. Hiss, you're a scammer. Blake frowned. Crack. At this moment, the classroom door was violently smashed open by Filch. Hermione watched in despair as the classroom door opened in front of him. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and support our channel.